Hi, welcome to Heady Remarks. It's December 3rd, 2022. I wanted to talk about Senator Joseph McCarthy and, the McCarthy hearings and his trying to clean out the government, the United States government, of communists, subversive, secret Soviet agents. Why am I nervous? It's always hard. It's hard to click the button. But I did it. Okay, so I listened to an audiobook. Oh, there's my heater. It's called Blacklisted by History by M. Stanton Evans, who is dead now, unfortunately. Hey! Tribal Defender! Yeah, I started a little earlier today, so glad you could pop in. Welcome. Okay, so this took place in the 50s. It was the second Red Scare. The first one happened earlier. Oh my God. Okay, I'm just gonna, I'll just say this. The link, the Telegram link, it's not the private chat link that I put in the below the video. But if I approve of you, I'll send you the link to the private chat link. Anyone who might want to get in there. Also, after I do the live stream, I upload to BitChute, Rumble, Odyssey. I think eventually I'd like to be able to just stream straight from Odyssey and maybe just get out of YouTube altogether eventually. I don't know. It's just that YouTube makes you cut out so many clips when you try to play any video that I don't know. If people don't watch live, I tell them to watch it on Odyssey because they'll be able to most likely see the actual whole thing, because it's just difficult with the copyright stuff with YouTube is kind of out of control. They act like the fair use thing doesn't even exist for the most part. Okay, so Senator Joseph McCarthy, he's from Wisconsin, or he was from Wisconsin. Restream and OBS can allow you to stream on Odyssey. Restream and OBS. Oh, OBS scares me. I use StreamYard, which is for boomers and old people, but I could try that. When I tried to link my YouTube channel to Odyssey, I already have an Odyssey channel, so it was not linking my one that I already have. It was trying to make me create a new one, or something weird was going on. I'm very bad at this, but I keep doing it for some reason. I want to read this article from the Objective Standard written by Andrew Bernstein called The Vindication of Joseph McCarthy, because for the most part, anytime you look up Joseph McCarthy, he's one of those people that are vilified really hardcore, and it made me suspicious because they're so unfair that it made me suspicious. And kind of the same thing as what happened with Trump, actually. So, yeah, The Vindication of Joseph McCarthy by Andrew Bernstein. This is from November 20th, 2016. Okay, here it is. Joseph McCarthy is the most unjustly demonized individual in American history. Oh, and the McCarthy hearings are they were aired on television for 8 hours straight every day for a while. So it was an early version of reality TV in a way. So women are at home doing their ironing, watching this every day. And I guess they were, Steen. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of them, but some of them are all right. They're not so bad. This is in defense of him. So, unjustly demonized. Okay, so in February 1950, McCarthy, a Republican senator from Wisconsin, launched a massive campaign against alleged communists and Soviet agents working for and perhaps spying on the U.S. government. In Senate hearings stretching across much of the first half of the 1950s, he accused numerous U.S. government employees, including many in the State Department, of being communists or even agents of Soviet intelligence. He was bitterly opposed by powerful members of the Senate, by numerous high-ranking officials within both the Truman and Eisenhower administrations, and by the overwhelming correspondence of the press corps. He was finally censured by the U.S. Senate in December 1954 and died possibly of effects of alcoholism several years later. He was 48. Stop drinking! I always have to throw that in there. Don't drink alcohol. It's bad. The demonizations then and now involve charges that McCarthy lied, badgered, intimidated, victimized innocents, and fanned the flames of a massive anti-communist hysteria. Yeah, they call it a witch hunt and stuff. A typical account of his methods is provided by History.com's This Day in History, which claims, in widely publicized hearings, McCarthy bullied defendants under cross-examination with unlawful and damaging accusations, destroying the reputations of hundreds of innocent officials and citizens. The pejorative term McCarthyism was coined by his critics to denote the practice of making accusations of disloyalty, especially of pro-communist activity, in many instances unsupported by proof or based on slight, doubtful, or irrelevant evidence. I specifically remember reading that as a vocabulary word in like junior high in our textbook, McCarthyism. Like I have a memory of, in bold and then the definition. So yeah, they started brainwashing us about him pretty young. Even historians who investigate and expose Soviet espionage, penetration of the U.S. government, claim that McCarthy's charges were, in fact, based on thin evidence, and that he used anti-communism for partisan purposes. Finally, some FBI agents who actively pursued Soviet spies join in the chorus of criticism. I was more interested in countering the activities of the Soviet KGB and GRU. I don't know what that is. McCarthy starred chamber proceedings. His lies and overstatements hurt our counterintelligence efforts. But evidence accumulated from a variety of sources, including Soviet archives, since the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, shows that McCarthy's charges were, in numerous cases, neither false nor hysterical, but correct. It is time to examine the new evidence objectively and to reassess McCarthy, his activities in Soviet espionage, penetration of the U.S. government. In so doing, we perform an act of justice to a wrongly maligned man, gain greater knowledge of the Cold War's early days, and sound a warning regarding possible espionage within and against the U.S. government by current or future enemies. To reassess McCarthy accurately requires knowledge of 1, the murderously evil nature of communism, 2, the massive Soviet espionage penetration of the U.S. government, and 3, the specifics of numerous cases regarding McCarthy's efforts to expose that espionage. Why am I having problems? Make it bigger. Regarding the first of these, readers are encouraged to read my recent essay, The Socialist Holocaust and Its American Deniers, and its sources, especially the Black Book of Communism, which provides data taken in part from the files of numerous former communist regimes, including the Soviets. Right, the Venona Papers. The Venona Papers. I'll explain later. Suffice it to say here that worldwide communism has been responsible for the murder of 100 million innocent civilians. More, it has done so in strict adherence to its cardinal principle. Because members of the owning class cruelly exploit members of the working class, the former must be expunged in ruthless class warfare. Items 2 and 3, Soviet espionage, penetration of the U.S. government, and details regarding McCarthy's efforts to expose it, are the focus of this essay. Soviet espionage, penetration of the U.S. government. The Soviets targeted the communists' main ideological enemy, the capitalist United States, even during World War II, when the two nations were supposedly allied in a death struggle against fascism. Soviet agents achieved widespread penetration of the American government, spying, stealing secrets, ultimately supplying data enabling Stalin's blood-drenched regime to develop an atomic weapon years earlier than otherwise. Oh yeah, when I did that episode about the atomic bomb stuff, I was sort of going soft on Oppenheimer, and now I'm not so sure about him. I just thought maybe he wasn't so bad because he didn't want to make more and bigger bombs, but that could have, I don't know what to think. Nobody involved was, I don't know. I'm not sure what he might have not been a good guy. I mean, I don't think he was good either way necessarily, but I don't know. I just wanted to walk that back a little bit because I was like, I said stuff. I don't know. The story reads like a spy thriller. A good place to begin is in 1937 to 38 when an American communist and courier for the GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence, oh, okay, that's what that is, named Whittaker Chambers, Soviet code name Karl, decided to drop out of espionage. Over time, Chambers had grown appalled by Stalin's mass murder and by the reaction of the American Communist Party, CPUSA, which blindly followed the Soviet line. Fearful for his life and that of his wife, Chambers retained copies of stolen State Department documents, which he termed his life preserve. These papers came from several valued sources, one of whom was Chambers' friend and a fellow American communist. Chambers hid the material with his wife's nephew, and he and his family dropped out of sight. The primary source and friend was State Department official Alger Hiss. In 1939, when the Soviets signed a non-aggression pact with National Socialist Germany, thereby becoming an ally of Hitler, Chambers became convinced that the Soviet Union was a dangerous enemy whose espionage activities should be revealed to American counterintelligence. Anti-communist journalist Isaac Don Levine arranged for him to meet Assistant Secretary of State Adolph Burle, B-E-R-L-E, FDR's top advisor regarding internal security. Burley's notes show that he appreciated Chambers' emphasis on espionage against the United States, not merely on covert association with the CPUSA. I don't know how to say his name. Burley. I'm just going to say Burley. It could be Burl. Burley made a list of U.S. government employees Chambers named as Soviet agents. These individuals included, among others, State Department official Hiss, lawyer Els. Oh, these are like fake names for them, I guess. Like alibi or aliases. Treasury Department official Harry Dexter White, Richard, and an assistant to President Roosevelt, Lachlan Curry, Page. But FDR brusquely rebuffed Burley's mention to him of Chambers' allegations. This at a time when the Soviets were allied with Hitler. And Burley did not send his notes of the meeting with Chambers to the FBI until 1943. In the meantime, while U.S. counterintelligence idled, Stalin's agents engaged in massive espionage against America. As but three examples, the Nathan Silvermaster Group, Silvermaster, PAL, was a Treasury Department official who headed a spy network that included both Curry and White, as well as George Silverman, Elleron, an analyst for the U.S. Army Air Force who provided information regarding American military aviation, Frank Coe, nicknames alias Pick and Peak, director of the Division of Monetary Research in the Treasury Department, and Solomon Adler Sachs, the Treasury Department's representative in China. Coe, Adler, and White aided the communist cause by using their authority to delay the delivery of a large congressionally approved gold loan to China's nationalist government, then fighting Mao Tse-tung's forces. Probably said that wrong. It's Mao. You know Mao. The delay caused China's monetary unit to depreciate in value, and the ensuing inflation undercut public support for the nationalist government, hindering its fight against communism. The Victor Perlo Group. Perlo Braid was a senior economist in the War Production Board supervising U.S. military industrial production. His group included several Soviet sources, one of them, Harold Glasser, Rubel, was a senior Treasury Department economist. Another, Charles Kramer, Mole, was a U.S. congressional staff member. A third, Duncan Lee Koch, K-O-K-H, was a lieutenant colonel in the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, forerunner of the CIA, and an aide to its director, William Donovan. Number 3, atomic bomb espionage, although U.S. Atomic bomb espionage. Although U.S. counterintelligence efforts were more stringent to protect the Manhattan Project, the top-secret effort to develop an atomic bomb before the Nazis, they were risibly lax regarding communists. Do they mean visibly? I don't know. As one example, J. Robert Oppenheimer, known since late 1942 to the FBI as a secret member of the CPUSA, was appointed scientific/administrative head of the atomic bomb project. This decision, in light of Oppenheimer's expertise and the fact that he was not actively cooperating with Soviet intelligence, was perhaps a risk worth taking. Nevertheless, Soviet intelligence agents permeated the Manhattan Project. Klaus Fuchs, Rest, a German physicist, communist, and major contributor to the Manhattan Project, supplied the Soviets important information regarding Enormoz, Soviet code name for the project, E-N-O-R-M-O-Z. Likewise, Theodore Hall, MLAD, M-L-A-D, a young American physicist and communist, was a valuable source of information. Above all, there was the spy ring headed by Julius Rosenberg, liberal, that's his nickname, that's fine, code name, an American engineer, communist, and a longtime agent of Soviet intelligence. Rosenberg induced his wife's brother, David Greenglass, Bumblebee, an American communist and machinist working on the Enormoz project in New Mexico, to pass along secrets to their Soviet spy masters. John Earl Haynes and Harvey Clare, two leading experts on Soviet espionage, concluded numerous secret communists and Soviet sympathizers eagerly volunteered to deliver American military, technological, and diplomatic secrets to Stalin. During the war years, American counterintelligence assets necessarily were focused on defeating fascism. Nevertheless, it is shocking how slowly American efforts unfolded against Stalin's espionage barrage, especially given that from August 1939 until June 1941, the Soviets and Nazis were allies. As but one example of American laxity, in 1944, Catherine Perlow, Victor's ex-wife, sent a letter to President Roosevelt exposing Perlow's espionage activities against the U.S. government and naming names. We know today that the Justice Department received her letter, but it was ignored both by those in the White House assigned to security matters and by American counterintelligence agents. It was not until 1945, after the war had ended, that two momentous events finally shocked U.S. counterintelligence into activity against the Soviets. Doodle squatch! In a free country, you're allowed to be a communist and undermine that freedom. What's the big deal? Yeah, I mean, I know you're being sarcastic, but it is technically not illegal to be a member of the Communist Party, but in these hearings, you know, they're like, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And a lot of them chose to take the fifth. Like, a lot of them. Which is suspicious. And you probably just would have been fired. You know, it's not illegal to be a member of the party, but people in government, we have a right to know, you know. And it went from them being our ally to not being our ally once we entered the Cold War phase. So they shouldn't be in there, definitely by that point. I wish they had never been our ally, but let's not get into it. Oh, well, we know, what did I do? Exploit, agent, counterintelligence. It was not until 1945, after the war had ended, that two momentous events finally shocked U.S. counterintelligence into activity against the Soviets. The first was the defection in Canada of Igor Guzenko, a code clerk for the GRU. He brought with him GRU documents supporting his claims about Soviet espionage. At first, Canadian authorities paid no attention, but eventually numerous Canadian communists were tried, convicted, and incarcerated for espionage, including a Communist Party member of Parliament. Although Guzenko's information referred largely to Canadian spies, he also provided data regarding atomic bomb espionage and claimed that an assistant to the U.S. Secretary of State was a GRU agent. A likely reference to Alger Hiss. After several weeks of his testimony, the Canadian Prime Minister flew to D.C. to brief President Truman. The Guzenko case thrust Soviet espionage to the forefront of American awareness. His documents established how deeply Soviet agents had penetrated Western governments, American as well as Canadian. But the case that most effectively augmented the termination of Soviet espionage was that of Elizabeth Bentley, Myrna, M-Y-R-N-A. She and her former boss, Jacob Golos, ran a network of sources for Soviet intelligence. In October 1945, fearful of both FBI identification and KGB assassination, Bentley approached the FBI and turned state's evidence. Her biographer, Catherine Olmsted, wrote, in the end, she would sign a 107-page statement naming more than 80 alleged Soviet spies in the United States. Many of those Bentley named were individuals she knew personally and who had previously been identified as Soviet agents by Chambers and Catherine Perlow. One shadowy contact of Golos's she engaged sparingly and knew only as Julius turned out to be of immense importance. Her physical description matched that of Julius Rosenberg, although it took the FBI 5 more years to identify his key role in Soviet atomic espionage. Further, one of her sources, Charles Kramer, had informed her that the GRU had a prominent agent in the State Department named Hiss. Although it took years to clear out the rat's nest of Soviet agents in the U.S. government, Bentley's confession was the beginning of the end for them. A few were indicted, convicted, and incarcerated. Alger Hiss, in 1950, was convicted of perjury regarding denial of handing copies of government documents to Chambers. He served 3 years in a federal penitentiary. Yes, because by then the statute of limitations had run out, so all they could get him on was perjury. Sucks. Oh, he never admitted to it either. He never confessed to anything, but it was proven that he was involved. The initial evidence upon which Hiss was convicted is in itself damning. For example, Chambers testified under oath that he personally knew Hiss to be a GRU agent in the 1930s. H-E-D-E, Heed Massing, redhead, another Soviet agent turned state's evidence, similarly testified under oath that she personally knew Hiss to be a Soviet agent. Maybe I should show pictures of these people. That's the thing that I had trouble with, is there's so many people. I do have like all their Wikipedia pages pulled up right now. I'll do it later. Oh, yeah. Okay, so redhead, Hetty, is her name Hetty? Massing, another Soviet agent turned state's evidence, similarly testified under oath that she personally knew Hiss to be a Soviet agent. Chambers produced his life preserve, copies of stolen State Department documents, some written in Hiss's handwriting and some typed on Hiss's personal typewriter. But today we have additional evidence culled from Soviet, Hungarian, Czechoslovak, and American archives, all pointing, despite Hiss's lifelong protestations of innocence, to his culpability. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were tried, convicted, and executed for their role in providing the Soviets information regarding the atomic bomb. They didn't confess either. The testimony of Ethel's brother, David Greenglass, was part of a strong case built by prosecutors establishing Julius Rosenberg as the leader of a spy ring determined to provide the Soviets with U.S. data regarding the atom bomb. The case against Ethel was weaker, and many, including FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, resisted imposition of the death penalty on her. But the year was 1951, and Judge Samuel Kaufman, alarmed by the communist invasion of South Korea and by a Soviet Union now armed with nuclear weapons, nevertheless imposed that penalty. So I think they were trying to get them to confess, and they just never did. I think she might have gotten out of getting killed if she had, but they just both refused. It's possible she was innocent, but being married to Julius Rosenberg, she probably knew something, she was his wife. But as far as evidence, like all she's, accused of doing, I guess, was typing notes up on the atom bomb that Klaus Fuchs gave to them. I think it was Klaus Fuchs. So it seems small, just like typing it up like a secretary, and I got her electrocuted. They got electrocuted. She got the same amount of volts as her husband. They killed him first. She got the same amount of volts, but she kind of died. She didn't die right away, and they had to do her again. It's kind of dark. She wasn't dead yet. Okay. Sorry. Now armed. Soviet Union, now armed with nuclear weapons, never imposed that penalty. Okay. Roy Cohn was chatting with the judge, apparently, and he insisted on the death penalty. Roy Cohn was the head counsel lawyer guy for McCarthy. Wish I could drop in, but I'm stuck working, says Bigfoot's burner account. Well, that's too bad. I appreciate the pop-in. Hope it's a good stream. Yeah, I don't know. I'm doing my best. It's been a month since the last time I went. I got interrupted by the holiday. But it's just so much information. I have some videos I want to play, but I don't know if it'll let me. Anyway, in this case too, later evidence emerging after the collapse of the Soviet Union corroborated the culpability of Julius Rosenberg. Yeah, so we had the Venona papers, like, I guess ever since during World War II. We broke the code or whatever, but it wasn't really publicly released until like the 90s. So it's like almost 50 years later. McCarthy, nobody really bothered to correct themselves after shit talking him forever, for decades. And they still don't. Okay, anyway, culpability of Julius Rosenberg. The Strongest is a book by KGB officer Alexander Feklisov. Kalistrat. Still doing the nicknames, code names. An unreconstituted communist and supporter of the Soviet cause who provided information regarding his personal supervision of the Rosenberg spy ring, portraying them as heroes and martyrs in a noble quest. Yeah, the Rosenberg's kids, their two sons, that's sad. I'm a human. That's sad that they had to have their parents get killed. But they were in denial for many years that their parents were guilty. And I think they had to finally admit that at least for sure their father was. Probably in the 90s. Okay, so nevertheless, most American agents of Soviet intelligence never suffered legal penalty. Instead, under remorseless FBI pressure, many either resigned from or were forced out of U.S. government employment. A lot of them just resigned, and weren't punished at all. They were allowed to resign, which, yeah, I don't know. McCarthy's critics. Even today, some of McCarthy's critics deny the extent or even the existence of Soviet espionage on the part of CPUSA members. But given the evidence now available, this position is impossible to uphold honestly. Evidence from numerous sources definitively establishes a massive Soviet espionage barrage, employing numerous CPUSA partisans against the United States government. One such source is the Soviet archives, from which much information has been culled. Another is the Venona Project, a top-secret World War II enterprise in which U.S. military intelligence agents, distrusting Stalin, cracked the Soviet code and for several years decrypted and read numerous Soviet cables. Venona was declassified by President Clinton in 1995. A third is a trove of FBI files made accessible under the Freedom of Information Act. But McCarthy's most knowledgeable critics have never denied Soviet espionage. Rather, they always claimed, and still do, that by the time McCarthy burst onto the anti-communist public scene in 1950, the purge of Soviet agents and identified communists at state and other government bureaus was complete. All McCarthy could do, and did, they claim, in order to make a name for himself was smear and ruin the reputation of scads of innocent persons. This charge, in 2016, remains the conventional wisdom regarding McCarthy. In truth, one part of this charge is accurate. By 1950, most Soviet agents and many identified communists had been allowed to resign quietly from U.S. government employment. But most is not all. Were there still Soviet agents and known communists working for U.S. government agencies? Before answering this question, several important points must be made establishing a context. Important background truths. Bigfoot's burner account says, I'm dropping a like and I'm out. We'll check later to watch. Cool. Thank you. Desiring to protect the reputations of those not yet proven to be communist or Soviet spies, McCarthy did not name names in public hearings. Yeah, the book mentioned that too. Like, they were trying to get him to name names, and he's like, no, we're not doing that until they're like here to answer. So it's like they were trying to get him to commit McCarthyism before he never actually did. He never did it. I know I'm using that word because it's like a vocab word that means what it means now, which is sad. It's like his entire legacy is like a lie made up to talk shit on him. Yeah, he was actually being really careful not to do that. And he wasn't super aggressive either. Like, anyway, for example, he would bring to the attention of the Senate and or the public details of case number 17, seeking to show communist loyalties without divulging the individual's name. In the absence of knowing the individual's identity, it was exceedingly difficult for journalists or historians to fact-check the specific accusations. Related, some of McCarthy's hearings were held in executive session, records of which were sealed by the Senate for 50 years, not open to the public until 2003. I'm drooling. Ugh. Today, from some of the above sources, especially FBI files, we know the identities of the parties involved, as well as a great deal of the security intel that then available on them. We know, therefore, what McCarthy knew. Archie, come here. Come here. He's laying over there. I wish he'd come over here. Second, strongly suspected in McCarthy's day and known with absolute certainty in ours, the CPUSA was controlled from Moscow and was an instrument of Soviet policy. For example, when the Soviets signed the non-aggression pact with Hitler, the CPUSA continued to take orders from Moscow and oppose U.S. aid to those battling Nazi Germany. Yeah, they affected policy, for sure. They affected U.S. policy elsewhere in the world. They helped Mao come to power, and he killed a shitload of people. So some people try to say, oh, like nothing was, like meh. They try to act like it's like no big deal, downplay it, or entirely deny. Not true. Haynes and Clare, based on extensive research in Soviet archives, wrote the essence of American communism was loyalty to Stalin. Third, hundreds of CPUSA members worked for and spied on the U.S. government, reporting information to Soviet intelligence. Haynes and Clare noted there were hundreds of American communists who abetted Soviet espionage. The party chief himself, Earl Browder Helmsman, knowingly and purposely assisted Soviet spies. Espionage was a regular activity of the American Communist Party. CPUSA membership on the part of the U.S. government employees, although not prima facie, lawyer words, Latin, evidence of spying, although not prima facie, probably saying it wrong, evidence of spying, meant loyalty not to the United States, but to the Soviet Union, and it meant the distinct possibility of spying. In brief, CPUSA membership by government officials constituted a substantial security risk. Yep, back to the Mao thing. They were like, it was like the nationalists versus the communists, and they were like praising the communists, saying like, they're just like Americans, they're just like us, they're great, they're almost like democratic, and they're the only ones fighting. They're the only ones like actually fighting. They just like helped steer U.S. policy to bringing him to power. I don't remember how many people he killed, but I'll pull it up. A lot. McCarthy sought merely to remove such individuals from government employment, not to incarcerate them in Leavenworth, nor deny them employment in innocuous private sector jobs unrelated to defense or government secrets, nor to hound or besmirch them in perpetuity, but only to fire them from their government posts. McCarthy had the funny idea that neither Soviet agents nor known communists should be working for the U.S. government. McCarthy's cases. In February 1950, when McCarthy launched his public crusade, were there still extensive security breaches within the U.S. government and or cognate intergovernmental agencies involving Soviet agents, known communists, or suspected communists? The answer is unequivocally yes. In May 1950, for example, as public furor over McCarthy's efforts swelled, Soviet agent Solomon Adler, Sachs, was still employed at the Treasury Department. It was only now that he fled, first to his native England, but eventually to his true homeland, Communist China, where he faithfully served the Mao Zedong, I don't know how to say it, regime that he had helped instate. Adler had been identified as a Soviet agent by both Whittaker Chambers and Elizabeth Bentley, a charge later confirmed by research into Soviet archives. William Remington was case number 19 on McCarthy's initial Senate presentation. Remington had been identified by federal sleuths as an active communist while in college and when subsequently working for the Tennessee Valley Authority. He had been named as a Soviet agent by Elizabeth Bentley, to whom he had passed information regarding airplane production. Eventually, he was tried, convicted, and incarcerated for perjury regarding his involvement in the CPUSA. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a recovered KGB memo listed Remington among 42 others as Soviet spies likely exposed by Bentley to U.S. authorities. That's the end of the sentence. In 1950, he was working in the U.S. Commerce Department. Annie Lee Moss is often portrayed as the quintessential McCarthy victim. Yeah, I remember her from George Clooney's movie, Good Night and Good Luck. They really make their ahistorical, subversive lies, like, in movie form. It's just funny. I'm like, wow, what brilliantly directed, beautifully scored, wonderfully acted, complete and total lies. I remember watching that. Another one I watched was like All the President's Men. And like, I remember not really understanding it as a kid and being like, I don't know why these actors are acting like this is such a big deal. But I wanted to like be a part of things and like act like I understood why everyone was so shocked by it. It's just weird. They make these movies that like, they're like very dramatic and emotional, and they like get people feeling a certain way so that it makes it difficult to tell them what actually happened. I'm not like saying that Nixon didn't do anything that JFK didn't do. By the way, JFK was friends with McCarthy, with Joe McCarthy. They were like good friends. I'll get to it. Okay, Annie Lee Moss is often portrayed as the quintessential McCarthy victim. She was a black woman, seemingly frail, who had been employed as a cafeteria worker. She denied any involvement with the CPUSA, but FBI agent Mary Markward, who started in 1942 and continuing for 7 years as a deep cover spy inside the CPUSA, had identified Moss as a CPUSA member, and the FBI shared this information with other government agencies. Despite this, in 1950, she obtained a post as a code clerk for the U.S. Army Signal Corps and received appropriate security clearance, handling sensitive material, some of it in plain text. She was still at this position when McCarthy investigated her in 1954. She claimed a case of mistaken identity, arguing that 3 women named Annie Lee Moss were in the Washington, D.C. phone directory. Her claim was false. There was an Anna Lee Moss, an Annie Moss, and an Annie L. Moss, the last being the woman in question. More to the point, the Annie Lee Moss, who was a code clerk for the Army and who was called before McCarthy's committee, had been described by Markward as a cafeteria worker, had lived for a time with a Hattie Griffin, and received the Daily Worker, the communist newspaper. The Moss testifying to McCarthy's committee acknowledged she had been a cafeteria worker, had lived with Hattie Griffin, and received the Daily Worker. Finally, she professed having lived at 72 R Street, an address that matched FBI records regarding her place of residence. Yeah, that was in the George Clooney movie, Good Night and Good Luck. It's a good movie. I like that main guy who played Edward R. Murrow. I mean, it's a lie, but it was a good movie, I guess. I don't know. I don't really think it's a good movie anymore, but I liked it at the time when I was different. But yeah, they acted like she was like some poor victim. Maybe I'll rewatch it. The FBI and McCarthy had the right Annie Lee Moss. Far from being an innocent victim, she was a CPUSA member working for the U.S. government, handling confidential material. Frank Coe, Peak, I guess he had multiple names, fake names, like Adler, had helped retard U.S. aid, I don't know why I'm off, sorry, to Chiang Kai-shek, thereby abetting the communist cause in China. In 1950, so they slowed it down, retarded it. In 1950, he worked for the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, an intergovernmental agency founded in large part by his former superior at the Treasury Department. This is a long article, holy shit. Harry Dexter White, who was also a Soviet agent in large part by his former superior at the Treasury, Harry Dexter White, who was also a Soviet agent. In that year, American pressure finally forced him out. Coe was called to testify at the McCarthy hearings regarding his work for the communist cause and pleaded the Fifth Amendment. In 1958, he moved permanently to communist China, working there for Mao's regime. In 1959, he wrote essays supporting a massive Maoist purge of Chinese society. Euphemism for mass murder, claiming the indoctrination in Marxist-Leninist theory had substantially increased Chinese economic production. Like Adler, Coe had been identified as a Soviet apparatchik by both Chambers and Bentley. Accusations later confirmed by Venona de Cripps. McCarthy's 1953 investigation into security laxity at Fort Monmouth, a network of labs spread among several New Jersey towns, revealed egregious leaks of confidential information. Anti-aircraft systems, missile detection, radar, and other advanced electronics for the military were researched there. People being loud upstairs. Security personnel at Monmouth repeatedly had reported their suspicions to U.S. government superiors, but had been persistently overruled. Because of such laxity, substantial amounts of classified information were stolen and transmitted to the Soviets. As one example, a McCarthy staffer tracked down in West Germany an East German defector, a technician named Harold Butner, who signed a notarized statement swearing that when employed at a Soviet scientific installation in 1950, he had witnessed stolen material from Fort Monmouth. Further, subsequent to McCarthy's hearings, a Soviet defector, Andriy, that's the nickname, codename, informed congressional investigators that vast amounts of information pertaining to U.S. radar had been smuggled into Soviet hands, largely from Monmouth. Finally, a U.S. Army intelligence officer acknowledged that our latest signal corps developments were appearing in the hands of the North Korean communists, and presumably aiding them in killing U.S. military personnel during the Korean War. How did this happen? For one thing, numerous employees at Monmouth treated confidential secrets as personal property, reproducing documents and then taking them home. Literally thousands of official papers had gone missing from the complex. Further, the CPUSA had established a group in the Monmouth vicinity named the Shore Club, including former Monmouth employees whose purpose, according to substantial testimony, was to pry information out of Monmouth. Ugh! Shit. Monmouth crawled with suspects. Aaron Coleman, for example, a childhood schoolmate of subsequently convicted Soviet agents, Julius Rosenberg and Morton Sobel, admitted having attended a young communist league meeting with Rosenberg, and Rosenberg himself claimed to have had contact with him while at Monmouth. Coleman was one of many Monmouth employees in the habit of taking home classified documents. In 1946, security agents suspicious of his activities searched his home and found 40 official documents, some of a confidential nature. When McCarthy opened his investigation, Coleman still worked at Monmouth. Although on a basis of restricted security and had open access to workers with security clearance. Ruth Levine was another suspicious character. She had worked for the Federal Telecommunications Lab, FTL, a Monmouth affiliate. For a decade, held a top-secret security clearance and had been accused by former communist John Saunders and other witnesses of belonging to a communist cell at FTL. Is that the same Ruth from the atomic bomb? I remember there being a Ruth. Is she David Greenglass's wife? The brother of Ethel Rosenberg? Questioned at the hearings whether she belonged to the CPUSA or had ever engaged in espionage, Levine refused to answer, consistently pleading the Fifth Amendment because the Fifth Amendment. Because of the McCarthy hearings, Levine was finally sacked from her position at the FTL. Coleman and Levine were merely two major security risks at Monmouth. McCarthy's hearings identified others. Might be a different Ruth. McCarthy therefore had abundant reasons to be concerned regarding the security problem at Monmouth. The fiasco is summed up in a public exchange between the senator and Andrew Reed, Monmouth's longtime security chief. McCarthy: have you repeatedly furnished information on individuals who you consider to be very dangerous to the security of this country and discovered that they were kept on year after year, even after you had supplied the complete facts on them? Reed: yes, sir. In addition to exposing Adler, Remington, Moss, Coe, and the security debacle at Fort Monmouth, McCarthy exposed various instances of severe laxity on the part of the U.S. government. But the foregoing is sufficient to establish the conclusion. McCarthy may well have been mistaken in some cases. He was a hard-drinking, two-fisted, pugnacious political street fighter. He was, at times, impulsive, sloppy, and loudly bombastic. He was a flawed champion for a noble cause. But in battle, after endless security battle, he was right. It's not over yet. But yeah, he came from humble beginnings. I think his parents just lived on a farm. He finished high school. He was really smart. He finished high school crazy fast. Did it in 1 year. After not having gone to school, he was I think he worked on the farm and in a grocery store and stuff. And later he joined the Marines. But anyway, I just thought that was impressive. Maybe, did he just take his GED? They didn't describe it that way though. They made it sound like he finished school super fast, all real quick. The causes of McCarthy's demonization. Why then the endless denunciations of McCarthy and the widespread use of the epithet McCarthyism as a pejorative? There are several reasons. One is that, as noted, the full data necessary to assess his cases was locked away in archives of both Cold War adversaries until at least the mid-1990s. It is only in the past 20 years that this information, a little at a time, has become accessible to researchers. A second is that government agencies did on occasion during this era treat as a crime the mere holding of communist views. This is evident in some of the hearings held by the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, especially in its investigation of communists in Hollywood. Yeah, he had nothing to do with that. During this era, he was a senator. He has nothing to do with the House. It's a House committee. He's a senator. He had nothing to do with that. I'm not saying it's a bad. I didn't really look into that a lot. People just often misunderstand and they associate him with everything to do with anything like that, and he just had nothing to do with it. So during this era, Hollywood was rife with CPUSA members and other advocates of communism. But these are not necessarily one and the same. To be a member of the Communist Party during the Cold War was to be an active supporter of America's enemy, the Soviet Union. Evidence that an American was a member of the CPUSA was legitimate cause for government investigation, and potentially charges of espionage or treason. But merely advocating communism or even persuading others to embrace it is not properly regarded as a crime. It is neither morally nor legally akin to stealing U.S. government secrets, providing them to a military enemy, thereby materially strengthening the enemy and exacerbating the danger to the lives of U.S. citizens. The critical distinction is often lost on people, and so McCarthy, as an avatar of anti-communism, lends his name to an entire era, including its governmental abuses. Nevertheless, something still does not add up here. Some other factor is necessary to explain the hysterical anti-McCarthy denunciations and ongoing propaganda. Yet they started attacking him almost immediately. I'll get to it. Why have so many U.S. journalists and intellectuals from the 1950s and to this day vehemently denounced McCarthy? They also went after Whittaker Chambers, the defector who was trying to come forward. They were trying to indict him. It was weird. They were, something very suspicious was going on. Instead of going after the people that might be communists, like subversive espionage agent, whatever people, they were going after the accusers. Which is, yeah, that's suspicious. That's weird. Okay, so why have so many U.S. journalists, intellectuals denounce McCarthy? Given the information now available, why do so many refuse to acknowledge and publicly discuss the massive Soviet espionage penetration of the U.S. government and the fact that McCarthy was so often right? Why do journalists and intellectuals persist in virulent outrage against this man? Clearly, McCarthy struck a nerve in many. Oh, I've seen a lot of articles written more recently where they're comparing him to Trump, of course, and they call him a demagogue. I don't even know what that is. I might look it up. Clearly, McCarthy struck a nerve in many, but what nerve? His own words provide a clue. You cannot offer friendship to tyrants and murderers without advancing the cause of tyranny and murder. Or even more forcefully, coexistence with communists is neither possible, nor honorable, nor desirable. Our long-term objective must be the eradication of communism from the face of the earth. So I just wanted to say, like, I didn't really realize, it gave me some perspective a little bit to understand that these were people that literally wanted to control the world. So I'm very, like, non-interventionist and, like, anti-war for the most part, you know? But I do sort of understand certain things now, like the Korean War and Vietnam War. I kind of understand why we thought we kind of had to get in there and not just let these people blanket the world with them, with their shitty ideas. Fucking Marx. I mean, I don't know. It's complicated. Whatever his flaws, McCarthy's principled opposition to communist totalitarianism represents the essence of his character. What is the essence of his critics' character? This is revealed in their words, some of which I discuss in The Socialist Holocaust and Its American Deniers. Here are a few indications. World Revolution, Doodle Squatch. Yeah, it was spreading like black ink. Well, I'm probably just thinking that because of like this thing that McCarthy, I'll show a video of it. It's like a little, okay, let's get through this damn article. It's so long. Okay, here are a few indications of his critics' characters. Regarding American opposition to the Soviet Union, Professor Ellen Schrecker, Yeshiva University, wrote, the fervid anti-communism of the early Cold War did tap into something dark and nasty in the human soul. Political historian David Cote argued that American capitalism, business, free enterprise, prosperity, and liberty had little to fear from domestic communism. To ascertain the real sources of anti-communist hysteria, we must look toward the unassimilated alien, the hyphenated American still carrying the contagion of old world socialism, that creeping gradualist Fabian New Dealism, which posed so insidious a threat to unbridled business, big or small. Okay. I got kind of confused there. Commies wanted world revolution. They really believed in the power of the mind virus. Yeah, like Julius was a true believer. And, you know, this came right after the Great Depression, which got a lot of people in the correct state of mind to go for that. Kind of like how just growing up poor got me. Holy shit, it's almost been an hour already. What the hell? Anyway, just by growing up poor kind of made me like fertile soil for that shit, unfortunately. I never went like full commie, but I always remember first hearing about it in junior high and being like, well, what's wrong with that? That sounds not so bad. I can't afford to go skiing with my schoolmates because I'm poor. Help me, I'm poor. Okay, Professor Joel Koval states that anti-communism is an exploitation of the deep structures of racism for the purpose of managing threats to capitalist rule. As Haynes and Clare explain, according to Koval, it was not communism, but rather American Cold War anti-communism that plunged the world into a nightmare. Millions of innocents lie dead, and whole societies have been laid to waste. The title of Professor Schrecker's book, Many Are the Crimes, McCarthyism in America, displays succinctly the assessment of all these academics and many more toward McCarthy. McCarthy's major enemies are, for the most part, it's almost over. McCarthy's major enemies are, for the most part, either supporters of communism or sympathetic to it, or at the very least unwilling to recognize its murderous totalitarian nature. This is the dirty little secret of the anti-McCarthy hysteria that continues to permeate both American history texts and contemporary journalistic references to him. Historians routinely reassess past events on the basis of new evidence. Such work is essential to their profession. A wealth of important and pertinent data has become available during the past 20 years, including McCarthy's papers, which were unsealed by the Senate in 2003. Where are the scholarly studies finally telling the whole truth about this cruelly demonized figure? Where is the attempt to set right the historic record about this unjustly vilified patriot? Except for the excellent biography Blacklisted by History by journalist M. Stanton Evans, such studies do not exist. Really good book. Why not? Because of the dirty little secret mentioned above, American journalists and intellectuals have romanticized socialism, full socialism, real socialism, so much that they cannot bring themselves to see that communism is evil, and that a man who exposed this evil within the U.S. government is a hero for having done so. They recognize and properly denounce the murderous totalitarianism of race-based socialism, National Socialism, aka Nazism, but obdurately refuse to do so regarding the equivalent evils of class-based socialism, communism. Instead, they are unrestrained in their vicious denunciations of the courageous man who typifies and symbolizes American opposition to this murderous creed. And so, in his day, McCarthy was laid low by his enemies, but not before he did substantial damage to the communist cause. His enemies continued, and to this day continue, to besmirch his reputation. But despite all they did and do, they cannot expunge the positive aspects of his career. Evans, the biographer who researched McCarthy most widely and deeply, penned him a fitting epitaph. In the end, he perished, politically and otherwise, in the rubble he pulled down around him. Yet when the final chapter in the conflict with Moscow was written, amid yet another pile of rubble, he was not without his triumph. Oh my God, that was long. Did I already read that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it really is a mind virus. I agree. Okay, let's watch some videos if it'll let us. You know, of course, I pulled up some Yuri Bezmenov, and of course, I even pulled up some Kay Griggs. I don't know. There's just a lot of material. Okay, so I'm going to play these guys. I think these guys might be QAnon guys, but, like, I didn't realize that till the end. Just pretend I didn't say that, but I'm just warning you, I guess. Share screen. I mean, they're not talking about that on this, what I'm about to show you. God, that was long. That was long. Hold on, I can't remember if I share screen, share audio. Yeah, share. Okay.
You know, Kansas, we're doing really well. In the heartland, we're kind of out in the country. We have very, very few. Joseph of Wisconsin, which, of course, is the name of one of your great books. But it might be time for a rebirth of a St. Joseph from Wisconsin or somewhere else. And with that, Mike, would you take the reins and talk to us about who Joe McCarthy was? Tell us about what really happened with Joe McCarthy. And feel free to draw analogies and comparisons to where we are today. And I'll jump in every now and then with some questions if any come to mind. But the floor is yours, and we appreciate you, Mike King. And start off by telling us how we can get avail ourselves of your information.
Okay, realhistorychan.com. Go there. At the very least, sign up for that free report that I give away, How to Respond to an Anti-Conspiracy Theorist. It gives you all the counter responses to the nonsense that the normies throw at you about, oh, that sounds like a conspiracy theorist, or you can never get that many people to do this and that. Really shoots down their arguments. A very useful report. It also gets you on the free mailing list. So much of the content on the site is free. Enjoy it.
Shut it. Sorry.
It's the way you view
guys.
the world, that's for sure.
Mike, there's very, very few things that I read every day.
How viciously and relentlessly he was attacked, just like they've done to Trump in recent years.
Doodle says, are you going to research the New Age stuff from the 80s and 90s? Was it the symptom or the disease? Some kind of psyop against Christianity? Yeah. Bezmenov talked about that a little bit. I guess that was like 1983 when he started getting attention finally. But yeah, sure. Put it on the list. I've got a list, topics.
He was attacked for exposing communists. He began to figure out
Put it on the list, right?
There's many layers of this thing. And when he started going beyond just the low and mid-level communists and going towards the globalist establishment itself, that's when they really came down on him and destroyed him. But, you know, it was not true that he went after all these innocent little darlings who maybe were just a little bit liberal, and he wanted to get them out of the government. I mean, we see how these poor little innocent people today, now that they run everything, okay, we see how nice they are. The mask has dropped. You see the censorship, the endless, the spending, and the economic destruction, and the social and the moral destruction, and the.
I'm getting a waddle. Sorry, continuing.
I mean, now it's in your face. The censorship of thought, pulling down YouTube channels and banning books and all that. Who's doing it? These people who at that time were not as strong as they were today, but McCarthy warned that this day would come. And so it has. So he was prophetic. And what his investigations were in the beginning, or really throughout his time as the chairman of the Senate Investigations Committee, was essentially a mole hunt. The idea was to get these communists, these members of the Communist Party, who were working in various positions in the federal government. And
talk faster.
Now, when you work for the government, they ask you, "Are you a communist? Have you been a member?" So, in order to get a job in the government, you have to lie.
Oh, I was not shit! Right? That was too fast.
And merely for asking some of these people, are you now, or were you ever a member of the Communist Party? He has been vilified.
Oh, I fucked up.
How can you work for a government
or a
communist or a member of the Communist Party and you're dedicated to the overthrow of that government?
Pause.
So what is so wrong about asking
it's
people
ignoring me.
And it's very interesting to know of all the people, there were hundreds over the years that came before the McCarthy committee. Most of the hearings were held in private. Okay?
What a
He didn't want
disaster.
publicly, especially if like some innocent people came under suspicion. He didn't want that known. Most of the hearings were actually
not responding.
Conducted in whether it was private or public. So many cases when these people, government employees, they met a taxpayer. When they're asked, "Are you a member of the Communist Party? Have you ever been a member?"
Oh my
they would take the
God.
Fifth Amendment. Like, I don't answer. Well, you know, can you imagine going on a job interview, Jeff? Or you're interviewing employees there, but you ask them a bit.
Oh God, my computer's freaking out. Okay.
Basic question about whatever their experience or education, and they said, "Well, Mr. Doherty, I don't have to answer that question." Very well, you don't have to get the job then.
Exactly. They don't have to work there.
Right. So that's what these innocent darlings were who lost their jobs. There were people who wouldn't answer the question. The reason they didn't answer it is because they knew if they lied, they'd get busted for perjury, because in many cases they really had the evidence that they were. But so no member of the Communist Party should have a job in the government, even if it's like a lower level secretarial thing, because you could still have access to information. I mean, that's just basic common sense. And that's all that so-called McCarthyism was about. And that's the truth.
Mike, how do we get to a place where
they also affected Pearl Harbor somehow? I forget exactly how, but they affected it.
McCarthyism was really second only to the N-wordism, when all he was trying to do was identify card-carrying members of the Communist Party within the elected government.
A lot of the actual Soviet agents were not official members because they made it a point not to be. But anyway.
And within the appointed governmental positions. How can we ever get to where we are in regards to Joseph McCarthy, with those being the basic facts?
Well, initially, he was always attacked. He was attacked in the very beginning, but it was kind of tolerated, and most of the Republican Party went along with it, because as long as he was exposed, mid-level communists or people who are out of government.
Hold on.
It was.
I just wanted to read one thing that I came across before I run out of time. Where was that? Okay, so I just found this randomly somewhere. I can't really remember. What McCarthy believed to be communism and Soviet infiltration was actually the entire East Coast foreign policy establishment of the banksters, centered on the CFR, and whilst a large proportion of the subversives that McCarthy was exposing were CFR members such as Lattimore, Curry, et al., there were 3 individuals in particular who were too well connected to the banksters for McCarthy to be allowed to continue his investigations and exposures. So a lot of people say that going after the army is what caused his downfall. They have that famous it's manufactured. They wanted it to be this famous thing. Have you no decency, sir? But this person, wherever I found this, I'm sorry, thinks otherwise. These individuals were Cord Meyer, John J. McCloy, and Robert T. Stevens, and he had unwittingly steered too close to the center of the U.S. banksters-dominated power structure. Stevens was Secretary of the Army at a time when McCarthy was involved in his final campaign before his silencing. An investigation into communist activities in the military. Stevens of J.P. Stevens & Co., Charles E. Wilson of General Motors as Secretary of Defense, and George M. Humphrey of M.A. Hanna Co. as Treasury Secretary had been elevated to these posts after a meeting between Eisenhower, the international bankster Sidney Weinberg, and General Lucius Clay. Those involved were members of the Business Advisory Council, BAC, Weinberg and Clay being on the executive committee. Senator Ralph Flanders, who introduced the resolution for Senate censure of McCarthy. Is that a sentence? It's not a sentence. This was backed by Senator Herbert Lehman, son of Mayor Lehman, founder of Lehman Brothers International Investment Bank, of which Herbert became a partner. You know, Lehman Brothers as in 2008. Oh, my brain stopped working. Collapse, financial problem of 2008.
Wasn't that much of a threat to the ruling establishment, because it wasn't that the communists were running the country. They never did. They had a lot of power, influence, penetration, but it was always protected by the one worlders and the globalists way up there, because they had so much in common with the communists, served their purposes. Okay, but they weren't. They weren't.
See my Christmas tree?
So as long as he was restricting his investigations to the commies, it was kind of tolerated in an uneasy kind of way. But as he began peeling back the layers of and he started digging into things like the Army. Okay, now you're in Eisenhower's territory.
Ooh.
You say? And he was, he talked about some of the bizarre policy decisions that were made during the closing months of war.
I forget the exact quote, but he said that they're like susceptible to blackmail, especially back then, you know, because people didn't want you to know if they were gay. So it's like nowadays you have to be basically a pedophile to be susceptible to blackmail, I guess, because everything's like different now.
World War II and afterwards. And he went after George Marshall.
That
was a big no-no because he was a sainted figure, you know, General Marshall, and later Secretary of State Marshall. He gave a speech on the Senate floor, and it's reproduced in a booklet. I mean, he just trashes him straight up as a traitor, you see. But even that was somewhat tolerated because he was, you know, he was already gone or on his way out, and that was part of the Truman administration. But when he started having the Army hearings, looking into the penetration in the Army, that's when the new president, Eisenhower, okay, who was put there, he was put there by the globalists to stop Senator Robert Taft from becoming president in 1952. Taft was a solid anti-globalist, constitutionalist, conservative, and it was his turn. He was the man. It was his time, and it was kind of assumed that he would be the next president because the Democrats were so unpopular by that time. Truman was eligible to run again, but he didn't. He was so unpopular, and a big part of the reason was because of this communist infestation and the realization that, you know, we fought World War II, and then we handed Europe over to Stalin.
Sorry about that.
Now takes over China. You see, so the Democrats were in bad shape. It was going to be a Republican year, big time, in 1952. So what do? They convert Eisenhower into an instant Republican, which he never was. He was always a globalist, leftist, pro-FDR guy, and they made him out to be he mouthed a few anti-communist slogans, and they installed him. Total fake opposition. And the ultimate evidence of that is the fact that the New York Slimes and the Washington Compost endorsed Eisenhower for president.
Wow.
A Republican. Now, that should have set alarm bells off ringing, right?
Absolutely. Mike, can I break in and ask a question?
Sure.
If General Patton had not been murdered by forces that the traitor Eisenhower was at least complicit with, if not involved with. Do you think that General Patton would have run for president and challenged Eisenhower?
That would have been cool.
He could have. He was up to something. We know that from letters written to his wife that are now available. He says, my plan of attack, first I have to, end my military career and then come home. So he was up to I don't know if it was maybe public activism or politics, but just knowing his character, the type of man he was, how bold he was kind of a throwback to a chivalrous time, He would have done something in a big way. He might have, aligned himself with politicians like Taft or McCarthy, or maybe started a patriotic organization, something. But he was a big name, and they had to take him down.
Absolutely. Now, did McCarthy ever talk about some of the things that the American hero General Patton was making known that the American traitor Dwight D. Eisenhower did at the end of World War II?
Not directly, because that would have been politically impossible. When you operate within the world of politics, there's certain realities. Being Eisenhower without actually the Democrats, led by Lyndon Baines Johnson, who stole his election in 1948, and already in his first
so
term,
JFK was friends with McCarthy. RFK was working on McCarthy's committee, so it was bipartisan. So when they try to say it was like some sort of like going after his political enemies, not true at all. And McCarthy was like a boxer at one point, so he was like, he would, do his thing, but then he'd be like clapping you on the back. Like, he just thought of it as like good fight, I don't know. I like him. He's cool.
Second term, he was like he
married his secretary. People say that he was gay. I've seen people calling him gay. People use that a lot. I think Roy Cohn was actually gay. His counsel guy who ended up being friends with Donald Trump later. I'm sorry. I'm all over the place.
Essential leader. I mean, so here's a guy who was like really handpicked. He was the essential leader of the Democratic Party, but Eisenhower and LBJ were very close and working together. So he worked with
close.
So you had LBJ, and his role was to crack down on the Democratic senators who supported McCarthy. That's something that's been erased from history. McCarthy had a lot of support amongst Democratic voters, but also a good handful of Democrat senators who weren't commies and traitors. And that included JFK, who was a personal friend of Joe McCarthy. And RFK was a lawyer at the time, served as a lawyer.
When they had to vote on censuring him, which was sad and mean, and he felt very betrayed, and he ended up dying shortly after. He died very young, McCarthy. JFK, he didn't want to be there to have to vote against, like, he wasn't there. He didn't vote. He had some minor surgery operation thing that he had. He probably on purpose avoided it.
Good to keep us out of World War II. He hated FDR. He lost his son in a war.
Yep.
So
who?
Again, that's erased from history, because you can't have the Kennedys exalted as American royalty on the one hand, and then you discover that they were strong supporters of Joe McCarthy on the other.
And it's sad that it's so easy to erase things from the public mind. Whatever happened to us being investigators? Whatever happened to us reading books and digging in? We've got more information available.
This day and age, to just take at face value. Okay. And he's trying, but he was known to be a communist. He was discovered to be a communist and then promoted. And he's trying to figure out who authorized this, who allowed this to happen. So this wasn't like a guy who snuck through the cracks. There had to be higher ups who said, "Yeah, let it go." Absolutely. And that was the issue of the day. It was called "Who Promoted Perez?" Peres was his name. And at one point there was. He's questioning a actual general. Oh, don't quote me on that. Could be a lower officer, and he's trying to get to the bottom of this. And he says, "Would you agree, general or colonel or whatever, that whoever did promote this man should himself be removed?" And he said, "No, not necessarily." And McCarthy was stunned. He said, "Well, then you know what? You're not fit to wear that uniform." And the fake news of the day, they took it and said he said to a respected officer he wasn't fit to wear the uniform. But they don't say why. The guy just asked him.
Yeah, they're extremely dishonest and unfair, just like today.
Allows the promotion of a communist.
And it makes you know, I know it's been said before, but you really got to ask yourself, if the news is this fake, how fake is history? You have to, if you care about truth.
Individual be whatever, removed, court-martialed. And this guy said he didn't really have a problem with it. That's the context.
YouTube won't let me threaten a deceased LBJ. Yeah.
Heard was that he's telling people you're not fit to wear the uniform. So I mean, I read so much of the transcripts, which are available online, the back and forth between McCarthy and various witnesses. And sometimes they go back and forth. They get a little bit contested. And when McCarthy says something a little bit strong, that's the quote they take and they run with it to make him look like a maniac. But they don't show anything for him. The only thing he had left were maybe like 20 hardcore Republicans who still stood in his corner.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say his wife seemed cute. She was pretty and they seemed happy. Like, I saw a video of them at their wedding and they seemed genuinely, sincerely to like each other. I don't think she was his beard, you know, like I just don't. They adopted a baby at one point. I don't know why. I don't know if he couldn't, maybe one of them couldn't have kids or something. I don't know.
It was interesting. JFK called out sick that day. So the Democrats were unanimous in their vote to condemn McCarthy, but JFK went and had some.
And they thought that she might have some influence on him, but she was like him. They got along. They agreed. They were similar. So, anyway.
Took as you so aptly described, a bipartisan concern for the safety of our nation and turned it into a partisan attack upon a great American.
Yeah. I mean, you talk three of the biggest scumbags in American politics at that time would be Eisenhower, LBJ, who after 54 became the Senate majority leader, because Eisenhower deliberately sold out a bunch of Republican senators and enabled the Democrats to take the Senate. I got a whole book. It's not up here. I got a book called "I Don't Like Ike."
Right. And
one of our worst presidents. I mean, he really destroyed the true Republican Party.
Yeah, YouTube.
But that was the other co-conspirator, LBJ, and then the leader of the moderate Republicans, the rhinos of the day in the Senate, Prescott Bush. So you had Prescott Bush, LBJ, and Eisenhower. What an unholy trinity, all aligned against Joe McCarthy, along with the New York Slimes, Washington Compost, ABC, NBC, CBS. It was early days of television. There's still some videos you can find on YouTube. You could see how they would have McCarthy on these Sunday morning shows, and they would all attack him like a bunch of piranhas, but he'd hold his own. The man had balls. Really, a really great man. But they gave him the same treatment they gave Trump today.
Very much.
You know the slogan I always use: fake history is the fake news that has passed into the rearview mirror. And you go back in articles, newspaper articles, you see just the misrepresentation, 180 degrees upside down, the attacks that they launched against him, and it hurt his popularity. But yeah, even up until the very end, he probably had the strong support of a third of the American public. But at his peak, that number was probably up about 80%.
And what happened to him after the censure? Personally, what happened to McCarthy?
Okay, well, it wasn't just the censure that stopped him, because the censure came in late 1954. The Republicans still had the majority. And the censure is basically just, we don't approve, bad boy. There's
right.
No real teeth to it, but it was embarrassing and it did hurt him a bit. The second blow, the number two of the 1-2 punch, came with the election of November 1954. It was a narrow Republican majority flipped to a narrow Democrat majority solely because Eisenhower he let these, he was popular, but he wouldn't campaign, he wouldn't endorse a lot of these guys. And he didn't go to bat for these guys because the fake news media was viciously attacking the Republicans, specifically the more conservative ones. And Eisenhower, rather than come to their aid like Trump does, he can campaign for people, just kind of stood back, did nothing, and he let them fall. And when the Democrats now they won that small majority, well, what happens? That means that McCarthy was no longer the chairman of the investigations committee because he's not thinking for the minority. So he's still on the investigations committee, but the committee is run by a demon rat. And he's just the,
oh, geez.
They call it the vice chairman. But the way it works is whoever party controls,
I think his name was Moose.
Whoever party controls the Senate controls the committee.
Right.
So 1955 rolls around. He really doesn't have any authority left anymore. The committee was totally deballed.
Yeah, and Eisenhower had like some party
so
that
was
he invited
it was more
everyone to, except for McCarthy. So he was being a little bitch.
The election, which gave the Senate to the Democrats, that's not McCarthy, then the censure. Fake history portrays it as if the censure ruined him and destroyed him. It really didn't. Had they held on to the Senate, he would still been doing the investigations, he would still been in the committee. So, but Eisenhower did that. And it's interesting, in the 8 years of Eisenhower, the Republicans went from having majorities in both houses to the Democrats having super majorities in both houses.
Wow, that's amazing.
The Eisenhower years were an absolute bloodbath for the Republican Party. And
yeah, so this whole thing went on, it was like only really 5 years that it happened. Oh, God. Everything takes so much longer than I think it's going to. The title of this video is silly, but I don't know. I just wanted to show McCarthy a little bit. Don't look at the title. It's stupid. It says communism is Satanism. I don't know. Maybe it is.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. One communist among the American advisors at Yalta was one communist too many. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
The question, why is it important to you, the people of America, to know why the educational director and the vice president of CBS so closely follows the Communist Party line? To answer that question, we must turn back the pages of history. A little over 100 years ago, a little group of men in Europe conspired to deliver the world to a new system, to communism. Under their system, the individual was nothing, the family was nothing, God did not even exist. Their theory was that an all-powerful state should have the power of life or death over its citizens without even a trial. That everything...
I was watching something last night to sort of remind myself, you know, in the midst of all this boring, like, legal jargon stuff, just how evil the Soviet Union was. Like, their death quotas, where it's like, they're not even just trying to kill their enemies anymore. They're just trying to meet quotas, like, and upping the quotas. Like, can I kill more? Can I kill more? Instead of 10,000, 7,000, 10,000, 17,000. Like, just really randomly going, like, I don't really get it. Death was essential. Like, they had to keep the death churning going, and I don't really get it.
And everybody belonged to the rulers of the state. They openly wrote, nothing secret about it, that in their efforts to gain power...
Just the repression and the torture and the murder and the fear. Zero freedom.
Or they would be justified in doing anything. They would be justified in following the trail of deceit, lies, terror, murder, treason, blackmail. All these things were elevated to virtues in the communist rule book. If a convert to communism could be persuaded that he was a citizen of the world, it of course would be much easier to make him a traitor to his own country. Now for 70 years, the communists made little progress. Let me show you a map of the world as it stood in the middle of the
This is what I was talking about earlier.
World War in 1917 before the Russian Revolution.
That little black dot
You will
is
see
communism.
there's not a single foot of ground on the face of the globe under the domination or control of the communists.
Or not.
And bear in mind that this was only 36 years ago. In 1917, we were engaged in a great world war in defense of our way of life and in defense of American liberty. The Kaiser was obliged to divide his armies and fight on both the eastern and the western fronts. In the midst of the war, the Russian people overthrew their czarist master, and they set up a democratic form of government under the leadership of Alexander Kerensky. Now, Kerensky's government instantly pledged all-out support to the Allies. At this instant, the Imperial German government secretly financed the return to Russia of 7 communist exiles led by Nikolai Lenin, exiles who had been forced to flee the country. A rather important event in the history of the world. Now, once in Russia, by the same methods which the communists are employing in the United States today, they undermine the army, they undermine the navy, the civilian heads of the government. And in 100 days, those 7 communists were literally the masters of Russia. Now, with all of the wealth of the nation at their command, they proceeded to finance communist parties in every country of the world. They sent to those countries trained propagandists and spies. In every country, they, of course, had to find glib, clever men like Edward R. Murrow, who would sponsor invitations to students and teachers to attend indoctrination schools in Moscow, exactly as Murrow has done. They trained communists in every country in the world. Their sole purpose was to infiltrate the government, and once communists were in government, they in turn brought others in. Now let us look at the map of the world as it was 20 years ago. At that time, there was one country with 180 million people in communist chains. Now let us look at a map of the world as of tonight, this 6th day of April, 1954. Over 1/3 of the Earth's area under communist control, and 800 million people in communist chains. In addition to the 800 million in communist chains in Europe and Asia.
That's what I was talking about, how it spread.
Finally, the communists have gained a foothold and a potential military base here in half of the world, in Guatemala, with the communists seeping down into the Honduras. My good friends, how much of this was achieved by military force, and how much was achieved by traitors and communist lying propagandists in our own government and other free governments? Let's start in Europe, if we may.
Does anyone watch that movie or that TV show, The Americans? I wondered if it was any good and if I should watch it.
They took by military force a little piece of Finland. In the same way, they took 3 small Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They took half of Poland the same way. They acquired the rest of Poland through Polish traitors and communists in our own government who gave American dollars and American support to the communists in Poland. They took over Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary without firing a single shot. They did this by the infiltration of communists in key spots in the governments. The communists took over Czechoslovakia without firing a shot. This they did by the infiltration of communists into the Czechoslovakian government also. And listen to what a high official in the anti-communist government of Czechoslovakia had to say about the communist enslavement of Czechoslovakia. Here's what he said. He said, in my country, the pattern was identical to what it is in the United States. If anyone, before the communists took over, dared to attack those communists who were preparing and shaping the policy of my government, shaping the policy to betray my people, he was promptly attacked and destroyed by a combination of communists, fellow travelers, and those unthinking people who thought they were serving the cause of liberalism and progress, but who were actually serving the cause of the most reactionary credo of all times, communism. Still quoting, because of those people, night has fallen upon my nation and slavery upon my people. If there were no communists in our government, why did we delay for 18 months, delay our research on the hydrogen bomb, even though our intelligence agency...
Okay, so yeah, I'm conflicted now about that bomb stuff, because he's like saying that like it's a bad thing, and I was thinking like Oppenheimer had like qualms of conscience, and that's why he was like anti-hydrogen bomb, and Edward Teller was pushing for it, and they got really mad at Oppenheimer for not being for it, and they like, you know, took away his security clearance or whatever. I mean, I guess by then Russia had it too, so it was like, I don't like it. I don't like this.
We're reporting day after day that the Russians were feverishly pushing their development of the H-bomb. And may I say to America tonight that our nation may well die. Our nation may well die because of that 18 months deliberate delay. And I ask you, who caused it? Was it loyal Americans or was it traitors in our government? It is often said by the left wing that it is sufficient to fight communism in Europe and Asia, but that communism is not a domestic American issue. But the record, my good friends, is that the damage has been done by cleverly calculated subversion at home and not from abroad. It is this problem of subversion that our committee faces.
There she is. That's
we
his wife.
Americans live in a free world, a world where we can stand as individuals, where we can go to the church of our own choice and worship God as we please, each in his own fashion, where we can freely speak our opinions on any subject or on any man. Now,
Who's Catholic? And Irish.
Whether we shall continue to
Irish
so
Catholic.
live has come to issue now. We will soon know whether we are going to go on living that kind of life, or whether we are going to live the kind of life
See, she seems fun.
that 800 million slaves live under communist domination. The issue is simple.
Look, they seem cute together.
It is the issue of life or death for our civilization. In conclusion, may I say that under the shadow of the most horrible and destructive weapons that man has ever devised, we fight to save our country, our homes, our churches, our children. To this cause, ladies and gentlemen, I have dedicated and will continue to dedicate all that I have and all that I am. And I want to assure you that I will not be deterred by the attacks of the Murrows, the Latimores, the Fosters, the Daily Worker, or the Communist Party itself. Now, I make no claim to leadership. In complete humility, I do ask you and every American who loves this country to join with me.
Oh, stop. It goes into some country song. So what kicked it all off was he was at this like Republican women's convention in Wheeling, West Virginia, and he held up a piece of paper, and just like a lot of stuff to do with this story, there was a lot of unnecessary time wasting and bickering over what the exact number that he said was. He claimed it was, shit, I can't even remember, 57, like a number. He's like, I have in my hand this many names of Communist Party members in our government, and it caused a big hubbub. That's like, he was a nobody. They didn't know who he, you know, like that's what sort of kicked off this whole thing. And everyone was like, well, then we better look into this. But I don't know why, but there's just like a shitload of arguing over what the number was for some reason. I don't really know why. RIP. Yeah, like it could have been 205, could have been 57. There's this guy named Robert E. Lee who's like not anything to do with the Civil War guy, who had a list of names that I guess McCarthy just sort of came across it, and he was like, why are these people still working in the government? That's weird. And it had been covered up, basically. What else should I show? Should we do Yuri Bezmenov? What should we do? Maybe we should show this. This was a nice little... I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Sure. Let's play this. Did I click share audio? I'm sorry. I'm so paranoid about not clicking that. Share. Yes. Okay. Oops. Where's the volume? Whoops. Why can't I hear it? I can't hear anything. Oh, well, that's weird. Hold on. Refresh. It's like no volume for some reason. I don't know why. It's weird. Okay. For some reason, there's no volume. Is it just on that video? Okay, apparently. Well, here's Yuri Bezmenov talking about... Oh, I don't know. Which one should I do? I guess we'll do this one. We'll do Yuri Bezmenov.
Violent clashes between him and police, his group and ordinary people, no matter what. It's black against white, yellows against green, doesn't matter where the division line goes. As long as this group come into antagonistic clash, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms, that is destabilization.
Former journalist from the Soviet Union who was trained by the KGB on subversion tactics, propaganda, and mass manipulation. He defected to Canada.
Yes, this guy showed up 1983-ish.
Canada in 1970 after becoming disillusioned.
He couldn't get attention for a while after arriving
With the work he was doing, and made it his life's work to expose the manipulation he saw that was happening in America. Now, I want you to listen carefully to this lecture and see if you can connect any dots, because you might just see some shocking parallels.
Okay.
And go this way, time, right? This is the beginning point. The first stage of subversion is the process which is called basically demoralization. It says for itself what it is. takes from, say, 15 to 20 years to demoralize a society.
He just said it takes between 15 and 20 years
We know.
to demoralize a society. Years ago today,
This is the time sufficient to educate one generation of students or children. One generation, one lifetime span of a person, a human being, which is dedicated to study, to shaping up the outlook, ideology, personality.
Can you think of a generation that fits that description? I
Come
most
on.
certainly can.
Okay, come on.
It takes from 15 to 20 years. What it includes? It includes influencing, or by various methods, infiltration, propaganda methods, direct contacts, doesn't really matter. I will describe them later. Of various areas where public opinion is formulated. If it's a free democratic society, there are many different movements within the society. There are obviously in every society, there are people who are against this society. There may be
what's that word that the lefties use a bunch? It's when they have like a bunch of different like types of people. Oh crap, I can't remember.
Criminals, ideologically in disagreement with the state policy, conscientious enemies, simply psychotic personalities who are against anything, right? And finally, there are a small group of agents of a foreign nation, bought, subverted, recruited, right? The moment all these movements will be directed in one direction, right? This is the time to catch that movement and to continue it until the movement forces the whole society into collapse, into crisis.
He's talking about a movement that could take a society and bring it into collapse. Can you think of any movements that fit that description?
Okay, come on.
So that's exactly the martial art tactic. We don't stop an enemy. We let him go. We help him to go.
What do they call it when they're like feminism, the trans movement, BLM, like everything? Like they use this word lately. God, my brain's not working. Cross. No.
In the direction we want them to go.
What it's called.
Okay? So, on the stage of demoralization, obviously there are tendencies in each society, in each country, which are going to opposite direction from the basic moral values and principles.
You might see the name on the screen Thomas Schumann and be a little confused. Well, Yuri Bezmenov is also Thomas Schumann. He changed his name to Thomas after moving to Canada in 1970.
That was actually
to take advantage of these movements, to capitalize on them, is the main purpose of the originator of subversion. So we have religion, we have education, we have social life, we have power structure, we have labor relations, unions, and finally we have law and order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? These are the areas of application of subversion. What it means exactly? In case of religion, destroy it, ridicule it, replace it with various sects, cults, which bring people's attention, faith, whether it is naive, primitive, doesn't really matter. As long as the basically accepted religious dogma is being slowly eroded and taken away from the supreme purpose of religion, to keep people in touch with the supreme being, that serves the purpose. Therefore, replace it, accepted, respected religious organizations with fake organizations.
We can see everything he just said playing out in real religious and
attract them to various different faiths.
And that's exactly what the New Age movement is doing, distracting people.
Education. Distract them from learning something which is constructive, pragmatic, efficient. Instead of mathematics, physics, foreign languages, chemistry, teach them history of urban warfare, natural food, home economy, your sexuality.
Do you think it's any coincidence
What's wrong with home economics?
that this is exactly what's happening to our schools today? People aren't taught.
Okay, social life.
I actually thought that was kind of helpful when I was learning how to sew briefly in junior high. I've been talking about junior high a lot this episode.
Replace traditionally established institutions and organizations with fake organizations. Take away the initiative from people. Take away the responsibility from naturally established links between individuals, group of individuals, and society at large, and replace them with artificially, bureaucratically controlled bodies. Instead of social life and friendship between neighbors, establish social workers institutions. The people who are on payroll of whom? Society? No, bureaucracy. The main concern of social workers is not your family, not you, not social relations between groups of people. The main concern is to get the paycheck from the government. What will be the result of their social work doesn't really matter. They can develop all kinds of concepts to show to the government and to the people that they're useful. Okay, away from the natural links, power structure. Okay, the natural bodies of administration, which are traditionally either elected by people at large or appointed by elected leaders of society, are being actively substituted by artificial bodies. The bodies of people, groups of people whom nobody elected, never. As a matter of fact, most of the people don't like them at all, and yet they exist.
I can think of dozens of organizations that fit that exact bill. Let's see, Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and the list goes on. There's dozens of them.
One of such group is media. Who elected them?
Intersectionality! That's the word.
How come they have so much power? Almost monopolistic power on your mind. They can rape your mind.
He's talking about the media in terms of 1983. What we see today is 1,000 times worse than what he saw.
But who elected them? How come they have a nerve to decide what is good and what is bad for the elected by you, president, and his administration? Who the hell are they? Spiro Agnew, who was hated by the liberal left, called them a bunch of enfeebled snobs. And that's exactly what they are. They think they know. They don't. The level of mediocrity in a big establishment like New York Times, Los Angeles Times, major television network, you don't have to be excellent journalist. You have to be exactly a mediocre journalist. That's easier to survive. There's no competition anymore. You have your good, nice income, $100,000 a year. That's it. Whether you are better or worse doesn't really matter anymore. As soon as you're smiling to the camera and do your job.
Doesn't this ring truer today than ever before?
Okay, yes.
And this
Eroded by the bodies and groups of people who do not have neither qualification nor the will of people to keep them in power, and yet they do have power. Okay. Together with that, there is another process. Law enforcement, law and order organization and structure is being eroded. For the last 20, 25 years, if you see old movies and new movies, you can see that in new movies, a policeman, an officer of the United States Army looks dumb, angry, psychotic, paranoid.
And now we've seen them take this to the next level. We're seeing defund.
Basically, he's a nice human being. He's creative. And he's unproductive only because society oppresses him. Whereby a general of Pentagon is always, by definition, a war maniac. A policeman is a pig, rude policeman. He abuses his power.
It's kind of scary how accurate this is, considering it was made in
a generalization like that. The hatred, the mistrust to the people who are supposed to protect you and enforce law and order. Moral relativity. The Angelo Buono process lasted 2 years in Los Angeles. And yet there are still some lawyers who say, look, he's a nice character, as a matter of fact. There was some witness who said, also a criminal, who said, well, he's a nice guy. I asked him one day to burn a house of my enemy, and he wouldn't do it. He's a nice fella. Erosion. A slow substitution of basic moral principles, whereby a criminal is not a criminal, actually. He's a defendant. Even if his guilt is proven, there is still a doubt. Okay, labor relations. At this stage, within 15 to 20 years, we destroy the traditionally established links of bargaining between employer and employee. The classical Marxist-Leninist theory of natural exchange of goods. A person A has 5 sacks of grain and person B has 5 pairs of shoes. And the natural exchange without money is when they bargain between each other. And only with the introduction of the third force, C, an entirely third foreign stranger who says, no, don't give him 5 sacks of grain, give it to me. And you give me your 5 pairs of shoes and I will distribute it accordingly. So that the economy will go. This is the death of natural exchange, death of natural bargaining. Well, trade unions were established 100 years ago. The objective was to improve working conditions and to protect the rights of workers from those employers who were abusing their right because they had more money. Objectively, at that time, initially, the trade union movement did work. What we see now is that the bargaining process is no longer resulting in the compromise, which is leading objectively to betterment of working conditions and increase of salary. What we see is that after each prolonged strike, the workers lose. Even if they have 10% increase of their salaries, they cannot catch up due to inflation and due to missed time. More than that, millions of people suffer from that strike because economy now is interdependent. It's intertwined like one body. If previously steel workers, say 100 years ago, could strike and nobody would suffer, now it's impossible anymore. If a garbage collector strikes today, the rest of the multi-million city is stinking. I mean, there's no more service. In Quebec, for example, we had the electricians who were on strike in the middle of winter. You can freeze your bottom, and they still were on strike. Did they catch up with the salary? No, they lost. Who benefited? The leaders of trade union.
We just saw this exact scenario unfold with the whole COVID-19 lockdown. We were told some businesses were essential, therefore they were allowed to stay open and make money, while other businesses were forced to shut down. And who profited the most from all this? Let's see, Amazon, Walmart, all the big companies profited, while the small mom and pop places were almost bankrupt.
What is the motivation for strike? Improving of workers' condition? No, obviously it's not. Then what is it? Ideology. To prove to these capitalists. And the obedient horde of workers, like sheep, follow these people. And they cannot disobey. Why? Because if they do, you know what happens to them. I was made to believe by media, by business, by advertising agencies that I need more and more and more. Have you ever heard any advertising on TV to consume less? No. No way. Whether you need a 6-cylinder car or not, you have to buy it. And hurry up. When I was driving here on the local radio station, an excited announcer said, you hurry up, rush and save, save, save. There is a pantyhose sale. Save by buying more. But what we did when I was working for Novosti Press, we would snow plow editorial offices, student organizations, religious groups with literature of class struggle. if not directly Marxist-Leninist propaganda, then a propaganda of a legitimate aspirations of working class, betterment of life, equality. And the absolute equality exists in Soviet Union, quote unquote equality. Everybody is equal in dirt, except some people are more equal than the others in Politburo. So the moment you bring a country to the point of almost total demoralization, when nothing works anymore, when you are not sure whether it is right or wrong, good and bad, but there's no division between evil and good, when even the leaders of church sometimes say, well, violence for the sake of justice, especially social justice.
Violence for the sake of social justice. Sound familiar? It sure sounds a lot like Antifa.
Say, well, violence for the sake of justice, especially social justice, is justified in countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, well, maybe Rhodesia. And we listen to them and say, yeah, probably it's true. Is it true? No, it is not true. Violence is not justified, especially for the sake of quote-unquote social justice introduced by Marxist-Leninism.
Demoralization through social justice. It should be the anthem for 2020.
The next step is destabilization. Again, this word says for itself what it is. To destabilize all the relations, all the accepted institutions and organizations in a country of your enemy. How you do it? You don't have to send a battalion of KGB agents to blow up bridges. No, you let them do it themselves. The area of application is, again, it's narrower now, not like the previous case. The overt legitimate actions of the KGB in this case would be hardly noticeable. There is no crime if a professor who recently went to USSR introduces a course of Marxism-Leninism in a Californian college, for example. Nobody is going to come to his doorstep and say, okay, mister, come, you are under arrest. No, it's not a crime. It's not even considered a moral crime against your country. So the area of application here is narrowing down to economy, again, labor relations, right? To law and order.
Destabilization of a country through the economy, through the lack of law and order, and through Marxist-Leninist ideals. All you have to do is turn on the TV today, and you can see many different examples of this playing out in real time.
Plus military. And economy, law and order. Yes, and again, the media, but wider scope, little bit different. I'll explain it later. Okay, basically 3 areas. Economy side. Here it's radicalization. On the stage of destabilization, we cannot come to compromise even within a family. The husband and wife couldn't figure out which is better.
And we see this exact scenario playing out in homes all over America. Families are dividing over their support for Donald Trump. Families are dividing over their support for Black Lives Matter. Families are dividing over support for defund the police, etc. It's happening right in front of our eyes.
They cannot come to compromise unless they start a fight. It's impossible to reach a compromise, constructive compromise between neighbors. Some people say, I don't like you to watering your lawn at that time because exactly at that time I'm walking my dog and he's getting nervous. He cannot pass his bowels, you know. So they cannot compromise. They go to a civil court or something like that.
5 years.
Radicalization of human relations. No more compromise. Fight, fight, fight. The normal, traditionally accepted relations are destabilized.
Again, this is what our country has become. You can no longer have a civil conversation with anybody without fear of triggering them and having them go completely insane over their ideological views of the world.
The relations between teachers and students in schools and colleges. Fight. The relations between, in economical sphere, between laborers and employers are further radicalized. No more acceptance of the legitimacy of demands of workers. Unlike Japanese, with the theory Z, if you ever heard of it, where the workers are involved in decision-making process, therefore they don't have moral incentive to fight their bosses. In the United States, it's just the opposite. The harder is the fight, the better. The more heroic they look. When the Greyhound network was on strike recently, the correspondents of local TV networks all over the United States were approaching the strikers, and they say, oh, yes, we are doing something nice. They look like heroes, and they were proud. There was some family. The husband was a bus driver. Now they decided in a protest against the bosses to camp somewhere in the forest. And they were presented to the audience as a heroic, nice people. You see? The violent clashes between passengers, picketers, and the strikers are presented as something normal. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we would be angry, say, why so much hatred?
And what he just said is 10 times worse today, with these quote-unquote protesters tearing down statues and renouncing our American history, just because it doesn't fit in with their ideological worldview.
Today we are not. We say, well, commonplace. Radicalization, militarization sometimes. As I explained on that stage, I took a step a little bit further. Shooting people. Okay, law and order now also is pushed into the area where previously people settled their differences peacefully and legitimately. Now we are getting with this court cases.
Like that guy who just shot that kid, that 19-year-old kid, because he was an extremist right after Biden gave that speech about MAGA being like extremist.
In the smallest
Killed him.
irrelevant cases, we cannot solve our problems
What's going on
anymore.
with that guy anyway?
The society at large becomes more and more antagonistic between individuals, between groups of individuals, and the society at large. The media puts himself in the opposition to the society in general, at large. Separate, alienated. Okay?
Alienated.
On that stage, you remember I was talking a couple of hours ago about the sleepers. That's when the students from, say, United States, if they are trained in Lumumba University, or developing nations, that's the students I was dealing with, are being sent back from the Soviet Union here. Or if they were already in the United States, in the country, which is the object of subversion, they spring to action. The sleepers go up. They slept for 15 to 20 years. Now they become leaders of groups, preachers, I don't know, public figures. Prominently, they actively include themselves in a political process. Now he makes it a political issue. He demands recognition, respect, human rights, and he rallies a large group of people. And there are violent clashes between him and police, his group and ordinary people. No matter what, it's black against white, yellows against green, doesn't matter where the division line goes. As long as this group come into antagonistic clash, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms, that is destabilization process. The sleepers become leaders of the process of destabilization.
So what phase are we in right now? Destabilization?
Doesn't mean that Comrade Andropov sends Comrade Ivanov to the United States. The person who takes care is already here. He is a respected citizen of the United States. Sometimes he gets money from various foundations for his legitimate struggle for, I don't know, human rights, women's rights, kid lib, prison lib, whatever.
Again, we can see this playing out in real time, with certain people such as George Soros paying for these movements and allowing them to prosper.
This stabilization process usually leads directly to the process of crisis. In case of developing nations, that's the area where I was active. The process starts when the legitimate bodies of power, the social structure collapse. It cannot function anymore.
Demoralization, destabilization, and crisis. Where do you think we are right now?
So instead, we have artificial body injected into society, such as non-elected committees.
Non-elected committees, we call them NGOs.
You remember I was talking about them here. Social workers who are not elected by people, media who are self-appointed rulers of your opinion, some strange groups which claim that they know how to lead society forward.
Like WEF, World Economic Forum, maybe.
They don't usually. All they care is how to collect donations and sell their own concocted ideology, mixture of religion and ideology. Here, we have all this artificial body claiming power. If the power is denied to them, they take it by force.
If power is denied to them, they take it by force. Where have we seen that recently? We've seen this play out in Seattle with the whole Chaz or CHOP movement.
Okay? Crisis is when society cannot function anymore productively. It collapses, obviously. That's the word for crisis. So therefore, the population at large is looking for a savior. The religious groups are expecting a Messiah to come. The workers say, we have family to feed. Let's have a strong government, maybe socialist government, centralized. When somebody put the employers on their place and let us work. We are sick and tired of going to strike and missing overtime and all that stuff. We need some strong man, strong government, a leader, a savior is needed.
The things are going to get so bad. The people are going to be calling out for a Messiah, looking for a savior. Where have we heard that before? Well, the Bible tells us this exact scenario is going to play out, and the savior is going to be the Antichrist.
Okay.
Population is sick and tired of it. And here we are. We have a savior. Either a foreign nation comes in, or the local group of leftists, Marxists, no matter what they call themselves, Sandinista, a reverend or some sort, Bishop Muzureva, like in Zimbabwe, doesn't matter. A savior comes and says, I will lead you. So we have two alternatives here. Civil war and invasion. Okay? See how it goes? Civil war, we know what it is. Lebanon is the best example. The civil war, which was artificially implanted in Lebanon by injection of force of PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. Invasion, we have
been a lot of talk of civil war lately.
In many other countries like Afghanistan, name any East European country, it was invaded by the Soviet army. But the result is the same. The next stage is normalization. Normalization is a very ironic word, of course. It is borrowed from 1968 situation in Czechoslovakia, when the Soviet propaganda and after them New York Times declared the country is normalized. The tanks moved into Prague, so there is no more Prague Spring, there is no more violence, normalization. At that stage, the self-appointed rulers of the society don't need any revolution anymore. They don't need any radicalism anymore. So this is the reverse from destabilization. Basically, it is stabilizing the country by force. Dead? So all the sleepers and activists and social workers and liberals and professors and Marxists and Leninists are being eliminated. physically sometimes. They've done their job already. Okay? They are not needed anymore.
He died in
The new rulers
1993.
need stability to exploit the nation, to exploit the country, to take advantage
I hate when I find out people are dead. The guy who wrote that Black Pilled by History book, he's also dead.
of the victory. Okay? So no more revolutionaries, please. Okay. So to reverse this process, from here, it takes only and always military force. No other force on earth can reverse this process at this point. At this point, it does not take military invasion of the United States Army. It takes strong action, like in Chile, a CIA covert involvement to prevent the savior from outside to come into power and to stabilize country before it erupts into civil war.
Bezmenov, this guy, died of a massive heart attack Tuesday, January 5th, 1992. How old was he? He was born 1939.
Okay, support the right-wing conservative forces. By money, by crooks or love, doesn't matter. Stabilize the country. Don't let the crisis develop into civil war or invasion. Oh no, your liberals will say it's against the law. Should we wait till the normalization come and Soviet tanks landed in Los Angeles airport? Now,
He was only 54. What the hell?
at that point, at the point of destabilization, also the process could be reversed. Again, easily than this. No CIA involvement at this point. You know what it takes here? Restriction of some liberties for small groups which are self-declared enemies of the society. As simple as that. Do not elect them to the seats of power, whether it is municipality level, state level, or federal level. So the answer to ideological subversion, strangely enough, is very simple. You don't have to shoot people. You don't have to aim missiles and Pershings and cruise missiles at Andropov's headquarters. You simply have
So a lot of the Soviets, a lot of them went to Israel. I'll pull up an article about it.
to have faith and prevent subversion. In other words, not to be a victim of subversion. Don't try to be a person who in judo is trying to smash your enemy and being caught by your hand. Don't strike like that. Strike with the power of your spirit and moral superiority. If you don't have the power, it's high time to develop it. And that's the only answer.
You hearing that, Werner?
That's it.
Thank you.
So what do you think about that? Is he accurate? Is
Sorry,
he
I didn't mean to react to the cross that way. Sorry.
describing what's happening in America
I'm just not a Christian. I mean, sorry.
today? Please leave a comment, and if you haven't done so already, please hit that like button.
I never mind.
And don't forget to subscribe and hit
Okay, Harry, just calm down. Stop sharing. That's what I should do, is stop sharing. Just kidding. EGP. Soviet records show a number of agents in high Israeli places, including lawmakers, military engineers, and a senior general. You know, I've heard people say, like, the Soviet Union never really, you know, it technically collapsed, but, like, it's not over. Extensive Soviet spy ring in Israel, encompassing Knesset members. When is this from? 2016. Knesset members, senior IDF officers, engineers, members of the Israeli intelligence community, and others who worked on classified projects. Top secret KGB documents reported on by the Hebrew language daily Yedioth Aharonov Wednesday detailed the extent of the network of agents run by the Soviet Secret Service. The documents were copied over a period of 20 years by Vasily Mitrokhin, a senior KGB archivist who defected to the UK in 1992. His edited notes on various KGB operations were released in 2014 and are stored in Churchill, God, I hate the ads, College in Cambridge. His handwritten notes remain classified by MI5. The archivist's notes on the KGB comprised some of the most complete information available on Soviet intelligence operations. A team from Yedioth was given access to the documents relating to the KGB's work in Israel and discovered the extent of the agency's network in the Jewish state. One of the Soviets' prime goals was to penetrate the Israeli political system. In the 1950s, the KGB targeted the left-wing Mapim party and, according to the records, recruited at least 3 MKs. One of those is referred to by the KGB codename Grant, and the archive claims that he lived in Kibbutz Shovel near Beersheba. Mitrokhin wrote that the agent was MK Elazar Granat, sorry, I'm probably saying these wrong, who went on to serve as the head of the party and was a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in the 1980s. Granat was said to have been recruited before 1967's Six-Day War by KGB agent Yuri Kotov. But the connection between them ended when the Russians, when the Russians closed their embassy in 1967. Granat's son, Dan, told Yedioth that he remembered Kotov's nighttime visits from his childhood. The Soviet agent would arrive in a diplomatic car bringing excellent vodka with him and great Hungarian sausages. Still, Dan Granat said that his father had no access to classified information, so that even if he would have wanted to, he didn't have the option of being a spy. Another agent revealed by Mitrokhin documents was codenamed Boker and was a senior engineer in a top-secret national project. A third was Jimmy, who had access to classified information about the Israeli aerospace industry and was involved in building the ill-fated Lavi aircraft. Another Soviet spy was part of the team behind Israel's Merkava tank. But the Russians' greatest recruitment was an IDF general. In 1993, when the archive came to London, MI6 passed the name of the general and relevant information to Israel's Shin Bet security service. A veteran of the intelligence service told Yedioth that the Shin Bet did not reveal the name, but I understood from them that it was a huge shock to receive this information from the British. Given the state of health of the general, and in my opinion, also because of the embarrassment it would cause to the IDF and the state of Israel, it was decided not to act against him or bring him to trial. To the best of my knowledge, he passed away shortly afterward, he added. Yedioth said it would release more details in its Friday issue. Last month, the Mitrokhin archive revealed the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas was a Soviet spy in Damascus in the 1980s. Yeah, well, you know. What do you think? Okay, this is getting really long. I just feel like there's more, though. Yuri Bezmenov's warning to America.
Was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking...
Oh, that's G. Edward Griffin. I didn't even recognize him. That's the guy who wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island. I like him.
Officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological
subversion is the slow process, which we call either ideological subversion or активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one of your enemy, the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas.
All right.
It happened in Grenada when Maurice...
Well, this is getting too long, but there were some other things I wanted to do. Dang it, why wouldn't that video play? This is where he talks about that guy the Beatles went to visit, the Indian guy. The author, M. Stanton Evans. I don't know. This is kind of interesting. This is Walt Disney testifying before the HUAC, House Un-American Activity Committee.
Hollywood since 1923.
And at the present time, you own and operate...
This is before McCarthy. So the House Un-American Activities Committee starting doing their stuff in 1938. They were investigating like Hollywood and stuff. Maybe I'll do something on that some other time. But I did want to. I don't know.
Well, I'm one of the...
I thought this was interesting because he says.
And how many people are employed there approximately?
At the present time, about 600.
And what is the approximate?
Well, we have sold them some films a good many years ago. They bought the Three Little Pigs and used it through Russia. And they looked at a lot of our pictures, and I think they ran a lot of them in Russia, but then turned around and turned them back to us and said they didn't want them. They didn't suit their purposes.
Are these films, the dialogue, translated into the various foreign languages?
One of my boys, my artists, came to me and told me that Mr. Sorrell, Herbert Sorrell, was...
Is that Herbert K. Sorrell?
Herbert K. Sorrell was trying to take him over. And I explained to him that it was none of my concern, that I'd been cautioned to not even talk with any of my boys on labor. And they said it wasn't a matter of labor, that it was just a matter of them not wanting to go with Sorrell, and they had heard that I was going to sign with Sorrell. And they said that they wanted an election to prove that Sorrell didn't have the majority. And I said I had a right to demand an election. So when Sorrell came, I demanded an election. Sorrell wanted me to sign on a bunch of cards that he had there that he claimed were the majority, but the other side had claimed the same thing. And I told Mr. Sorrell that there's only one way for me to go, and that was an election, and that's what the law had set up. The National Labor Board was for that purpose, and he laughed at me, and he said that he used the Labor Board as it suited his purposes, and that he had lost some election. He'd been sucker enough to go for that Labor Board ballot. He lost some election, I can't remember the name of the place, by one vote. Said it took him 2 years to get it back. And he said he would strike, and that was his weapon. So all the tools of trade sharpened, that I couldn't stand the ridicule or the smear of a strike. And I told him it was a matter of principle with me, that I couldn't go on working with my boys, feeling I had sold them down the river to him on his say-so. And he laughed at me and told me that I was naive, I was foolish. He said, you can't stand this strike, that I'll smear you and I'll make a dust bowl out of your place if I choose to.
I didn't hear that, man.
He said he'd make a dust bowl out of my plant. And I told him I'd have to go that way. I was sorry that he might be able to do all that, but I'd have to stand on that. Well, the result was that he struck. I believed at that time that Mr. Sorrell was a communist because of all the things that I had heard and had seen his name appearing on many of the Commie Front things. And when he pulled the strike, the first people to put me to smear me and put me on the unfair list were all of the Commie Front organizations. I can't remember them all. They've changed so often. But one that's clear in my mind is the League of Women Voters, the People's World, the Daily Worker, and the PM magazine in New York. They smeared me. Nobody came near to find out what the true facts of the thing were. And I even went into the same smear in South America through some commie periodicals in South America. And generally throughout the world, all the commie groups.
That conversation?
Well, I didn't pull my punches on how I felt. And he evidently heard that I had called them all a bunch of communists, and I believe they are. And at a meeting, he leaned over and he said that you think I'm a communist, don't you? And I told him that all I knew was what I'd heard and what I'd seen. And he laughed and said, well, I used their money to finance my strike of 1937. And he said that he got the money through a personal check of some actor, and I don't know who that.
Yeah, the first Red Scare, there were like some bombings and stuff that took place.
Listened.
Can you name any other individuals that were active at the time?
I don't believe it's a political party. I believe it's an un-American thing. And the thing that I resent the most is that they are able to get into these unions and take them over and represent to the world that a group of people that are in my plant that I know are good 100% Americans are trapped by this group, and they're represented to the world as supporting all of those ideologies, and it's not so. And I feel that they really ought to be smoked out and shown up for what they are, so that all the good free causes in this country, all the liberalisms that really are American, can go out without this taint of communism. That's my sincere feelings on it.
Do you feel that there is a...
Nor was I qualified to say on that. I just feel that the thing can be proven un-American, that it ought to be outlawed. And I think that some way should be done without interfering with the rights of people. And I think that will be done. I have that faith.
That's the tricky part.
Without interfering, I mean with the good American rights that we all have now and we want to preserve.
Have you any suggestions to offer as to how the industry can be helped in fighting this menace?
Well, I think there's a good start toward it. I know that I've been handicapped out there in fighting it because they've been hiding behind the labor setup. They get themselves closely tied up in the labor thing so that if you try to get rid of them, they'd make a labor case out of it. And I think if they can clean them out of the labor unions and get our unions, I believe in the American way of labor unions and to keep them clean, we got to fight for it.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So there was that. I'll stop soon, I promise. Nobody's even watching anymore. Glenn Beck had M. Stanton Evans on his show. I don't know if
I want to talk to you tonight about communism, and I have to tell you, I know how many people in America feel when somebody gets on TV and says, "I got to talk to you about the communist." 3 years ago, I mean, I would have made fun of people like me. I would have mocked me. I would have. Don't fall into that trap, please. Tonight, open your mind, open your ears. The country is in trouble. I don't want to believe many of the things that I believe. I think you're the same, but there are communists. Believe it or not, communists. It's amazing. I thought we beat it. The best thing to ever happen to the communists was the Red Scare and Joseph McCarthy. We had beat communism. We soundly discredited it. Okay, that's what I thought when the wall came down. Joseph McCarthy, he was a joke, right? In every sense, people viewed communists in his day as traitors who wanted to destroy America. They crept into the unions, especially the teacher unions. That coupled with the colleges. Now you have a situation where communists were starting to be the ones writing and teaching our history. Now what happens? After communism fell, it was erased. We have children growing up now that don't even know what communism is. Now you have the discrediting of Joseph McCarthy. The question is, was Joseph McCarthy right? Was he right? But remember the time period that we're talking about. We're talking at the height of the Cold War. That's when William Ayres is into Marxism. That's when all of the people who are ruling now are into Marxism. Marxism wasn't cool then. Marxism isn't like it is now. If you were a Marxist then, you were a Soviet sympathizer.
It still
you were
isn't
a
cool.
traitor to our country. You've got to put that into perspective. It's not the same then as it is now. Here is Barack Obama's mentor, Frank Marshall Davis. He has an FBI file on his communist activities. We have the Venona papers were released in the 1980s. What did these say?
That was 95.
I'm sorry, in 1995 this was released? What did these papers say? Well, remember, the KGB was compiling here. They say that everything that basically this man said was right. They were happening. There were communists everywhere, and they affected everything.
The sheer numbers of agents that they
infected.
large
Absolutely
number
everything.
of them.
Here in 2000, we have Giselle with.
It's what inspired Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That sci-fi. It was a book, and then it was a movie in the 50s, and then there's another one that was made with Donald Sutherland.
With
Jeff
her
Goldblum.
underpants and her swimsuit of Che.
That was the
We have
70s,
this
I think.
Marxist. Here is a very important time. Here's Michael Moore coming into the party, into the Democratic Party, sitting in the presidential box in 2004 with Jimmy Carter. That is critical that you remember that. The infiltration, the final step, come out on the stage and sit next to the president.
Hey, Michael Moore produced that movie, Planet of the Humans, so I kind of like him sometimes. I don't know. Like, there are legitimate grievances that are exploited, you know? Like, I was always, when I was younger, I really liked, like, Norma Ray and Newsies and movies about people fighting for, you know, better conditions or whatever, going on strike. And they make them very, like I was talking about earlier, they make these good movies to, like, engage our emotions and manipulate us.
There's a ton that you need to know. That's how we got here.
Catchy songs.
But is it who we are? Is this who we want to be? Will we even recognize that these people had an influence on it? What these people wanted to do is not a joke. Have they failed? I want you to be the judge.
Useful idiots get killed first.
You tell me if they failed.
That's all.
Communist goals of 1963 from the Communist Party USA, just a few of them. Develop the illusion that disarmament of the U.S. would be a demonstration of moral strength. Isn't that what we're doing right now with our nuclear weapons?
Oh, I thought he was talking about Second Amendment.
Number 15, capture one or both of the political parties. Isn't that what Michael Moore did in the presidential box? Get control of the schools and use them as
I think they're going to use this whole thing with Kanye. I saw someone going, well, it's time to make Holocaust denial felony. I'm like,
position belts for socialism and communist propaganda.
He would be in jail right now in most European countries.
Number 18, gain control of all student newspapers. 19, use student riots to foment public protest against programs which are under communist attack. Have you been watching this show? Number 20, infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments. Oh, you should see the reviews on my books. Editorial writing, policy-making decisions. 21, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and movies. 27, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. 1963 communist goals. Revealed religion replaced with social religion. 28, no prayer in schools because it violates separation of church and state. Do you know that in New Haven, they just took out in their diplomas the year of our Lord? They just did it because it's offensive. 29, discredit the Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. That's about to happen, that last part. Number 30, discredit the American founding fathers. Please, what are we doing on this show? Trying to restore them. 36, infiltrate and gain control of more unions. 37, infiltrate and gain control of big businesses. What do you think the Tides Foundation is? Number 40, discredit the family as an institution, encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Let me ask you a question. These are the goals from 1963.
They definitely encourage promiscuity.
This is 1791. Which one? Which one, America? It's a charter of negative liberties, says our president. Which one?
Are you holding blank paper?
You must choose. Where was the turning point? I believe America's turning point was Joseph McCarthy. And again, with the Berlin Wall falling down. Joseph McCarthy
I need to do one
was
on
so
that.
discredited, it made it almost into a joke.
Damn,
and when the Berlin
long.
Wall fell down, we beat it.
Shit.
And so now we disregarded it. Well, here we go again, down the same road. I want to bring in M. Stanton Evans. He is the author of Blacklisted by History, the untold story of
He died
Senator
in
Joe McCarthy.
2015.
Tell me, America, this is such an important turning point. Tell me, when you went to go look for the documents on Joseph McCarthy, what did you find or not find?
I found a lot of stuff missing, a lot of stuff that had been censored, a lot of stuff that was in the records in one place, but blacked out in another place. Mostly what I found was that the FBI files, which backed up what McCarthy was saying, had been withheld for 50 years. And we now have them, or many of them, and they show essentially that he was right in general. There was a massive penetration of the government, and that it was covered up, and that he threatened that cover-up. And that's why he was isolated, demonized, and destroyed. Right. That's the technique.
Okay. Tell me about Dies, because he was a Democrat.
He was the precursor of McCarthy in the sense that he investigated the same things. He was doing it at a time. He was a Democrat. He was the chairman of a committee. He was doing it at a time, mostly in World War II, when the Soviet Union was our ally. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people just didn't pay any attention to him. I mean, I had those hearings. They're very fine hearings. But a lot of the information that McCarthy later had, Dies did not have. He did not have direct access to the FBI stuff. I'm not sure McCarthy did either, but McCarthy had more stuff coming into him.
And McCarthy was, I mean, he was just an imperfect vessel, or was he not? Was he clean? Was he just completely?
He was imperfect, as we all are.
Yeah.
He made his mistakes, but he was telling the truth.
Okay.
And the truth was huge. It was so huge. We turned out the big lie, Hitler, and so there's also a big truth. The truth's so big that people can't believe it.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're saying.
Damn it! I wanted to talk about Roy Cohn,
because it changes your focus, and nobody wants to. I mean, gosh, nobody wants to believe that there were people in our government that were bad. You can believe in individuals, but you can't believe this mass kind of this cover-up.
There were hundreds.
He gets really demonized
You
too.
showed me a document. Can you bring this again? Tell me what this document is. This America.
This author guy, Stanton Evans, M. Stanton, he said that Truman was truly anti-communist. I don't know if I believe that, but he said that, and he just said that he was clueless.
Will horrify you.
People around
This
him.
is what this is, Glenn, is a record of the so-called Yalta Conference. This is long before McCarthy came along. This is 1945, where Churchill and Roosevelt met with Stalin at Yalta, which is a resort on the Black Sea in the Crimea. And this is the transcript of minutes of what happened at that meeting. An official version of this was published, but the paragraph that I'm going to, maybe I'll give it to you to read, is about Roosevelt is saying to Stalin and Churchill that he is going to meet with the king of Saudi Arabia after this conference, King Saud. And Stalin asked him, does he intend to make any concessions to King Saud of Saudi Arabia? And I'll let you read what the answer is for the arrow is.
The president replied that there was only one concession he thought he might offer, and that was to give him the 6 million Jews in the United States.
Yes, that
is. This is a collection. Where is this
again
from?
with the 6 million
papers of Edward Stettinius, who was the Secretary of State at the time of Yalta. Those papers are at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
Okay, he wanted to give them to Saudi Arabia. What? Okay, whatever. It's weird. Here's Kay Griggs. 9 minutes. It was like at 9 minutes she says something. It has to do with Wait.
Louisiana.
Yeah.
Oh.
This is just in relation to the military.
I met with the NCIS guy and a Marine that I just met cold call because I was kind of worried about what would happen to me, meeting him. So may I go to the ladies' room?
Certainly, mate. Matter of fact, Steve suggested
I've
that we
had to
break.
sort of go to the late. That's why I've been sort of antsy.
Steve suggests we break at 5 after, and I think it's a good
come on.
idea. Let's break and we'll pick up. All right, a little bit about your background, about the psychological profile that these guys look for. Let's see, we discussed the diary. We've discussed Kadok and Alexander
Robinson.
Couldn't read my writing.
I have a picture of Kadok.
Yes, I noted that. We're going to inject that. We'll inject. In fact, we should. And
You know what tail hook means, don't you?
No, what is tail hook?
Force straight guys into this so they have seriously damning video evidence to hold over them. Blackmail material. Epstein shit. Except nowadays it's like you got to get them to, do something with like underage people.
Uh-oh. I got a feeling.
Yeah.
Is it a homosexual reference?
Yeah, sure.
Really?
Sure.
Did you know that, Steve?
Why is she's weird.
Isn't it something?
Yeah.
The average person on the street has no idea.
Yeah.
It's like Watergate. Well,
She reminds me of like
that
my
makes
mom's
sense.
Mormon
And
friends.
tail hook probably is some reference to, what I honestly thought it was? When you refuel a jet or something.
It is. But you look, see the planes.
Okay,
like
we
this.
get it.
You
We
see,
get it. We get it.
I was told this.
I love
by
her.
Jerry Ann.
I think she might be dead, but she kind of disappeared. Oh, this guy, I was going to play this. It was like a whole history of like the first Red Scare, but I got to stop. I need to stop. So that have you no decency thing, that was like their big stupid dramatic moment that everyone talks about where they're like, he really showed McCarthy what's what. And the truth was, I didn't even get into Roy Cohn. Like they have one version of events where they say Roy Cohn was manipulating the military, trying to give like his gay lovers special treatment, basically. This guy G. David Shine, I think it was. And that's like their version of the story, that he was trying to keep him in New York and getting special treatment, and he was being like abusive and calling all the time and being persistent with the Army, and it pissed them off, and so they were like trying to get this guy. It was the Shine. There's like not really any proof. Roy Cohn died of AIDS. That doesn't mean anything, but it seems to be like common knowledge that he was gay, but he was like in the closet, and I don't know. What was my point? Oh, so like that's what was going on at the Army-McCarthy hearings was like, and then the book, M. Stanton Evans' book, his version of events was that they were picking on Shine because they were retaliating against McCarthy for investigating people in the Army. So yeah, and then it was during that hearing that this guy, Joe Welch, the lawyer for the Army, he was giving Roy Cohn a bunch of shit for some other incident where he's like, why didn't you turn these papers over? Wouldn't you want to tell immediately if there was a communist? And he was like badgering him a bunch about it. And finally, McCarthy was like, well, if you're going to like harass Roy so much about that, then maybe I should tell you about Fred Fisher, who works with you, who used to be a part of a Communist Front organization. And he was like, have you no decency? Even though Welch himself had already, like in a New York Times article, like divulged that information. It wasn't like new information. I don't think McCarthy knew that, but like that was the big stupid dramatic moment everyone plays. You can find it. I don't need to. I don't know. Stupid. This is Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Welcome home. I'm glad you're back.
How's Mickey and the baby?
Well, they're fine, but it seems that every
I don't know.
talk to him about them. He remembers them all down to the last small detail.
I should stop. I always overstay my welcome. I'm like totally alone now. Okay, I should stop.
But these things happen. Even to
I don't know. I might watch this.
That must be what he was doing in the cellar last night, placing one of these.
I never saw this one. I saw the.
I felt something was wrong, but I thought it was me because I've been away for so long. They have to be destroyed. Oh.
They will be.
Oh.
We're gonna have to search every building, every house in town. Men, women, and children are gonna have to be. We've got phone. I'm gonna say.
I don't know why I'm playing that. Okay, let's stop. Heidi, come on. Come on now. Is that it?
Consultant to the McCarthy Committee out of the Army. Second, that they...
A college out of university, there will be raised the phony cry that you're interfering with academic freedom. I would like to emphasize that there is no academic freedom where a communist is concerned. He is not a free agent. He has no freedom of thought, no freedom of expression. He must take.
Maybe I'll stop right at 3 hours.
Or he will no longer be a member of the Communist Party. I may say, Mr. Jenkins, I don't care how much of a screwball or a crackpot any professor or teacher may be, as long as he or she is a free agent. But once you have this United States, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, covered with a network of professors and teachers who are getting their orders from Moscow, from an organization that wants to destroy this nation, that wants to corrupt the minds of youth, then, Mr. Jenkins, we are rapidly losing the battle. The thing that I think we must remember is that this is a war which a brutalitarian force has won to a greater extent than any brutalitarian force has won a war in the history of the world before. For example, Christianity, which has been in existence for 2,000 years, has not converted, convinced nearly as many people as this communist brutalitarianism has enslaved in 106 years. And they're not going to stop. I know that many of my good friends seem to feel this is sort of a game you can play.
Lawyer for the mob, I guess.
As though it's something
at one point.
10,000 miles away. Mr. Jenkins, to answer your question, let me say it's right here with us now. Unless we make sure that there is no infiltration of our government, then just as certain as you sit there, in the period of our lives, you will see a red world. Sure. Mr. Jenkins, anyone who has followed the communist conspiracy, even remotely, and who can add 2 and 2, will tell you that there is no remote possibility of this war which we're in today, and it's a war which we've been losing, no remote possibility of this ending except by victory or by death for this civilization. Committee will please come to order.
I suggest in the interest of these hearings, the charges are often forgotten. The charges were, did Senator McCarthy and 2 members of his staff use improper pressure for Mr. David Schein for the Army? The countercharge was that there was blackmail on the part of the Army and the use of Mr. Schein as a hostage. Now, those are the charges that have been made.
Gentlemen of the committee, in order that we may all be quite clear as to just why this hearing has come about, it is necessary for me to refer at the outset to Private G. David Schein, a former consultant to this committee. I have been informed, 1, from mid-July of last year until March 1st of this year, David Schein was discussed between one branch or other of the Department of the Army and Senator McCarthy or members of his staff in more than 65 telephone calls. 2, this matter was discussed at approximately 19 meetings between Army personnel and Senator McCarthy or members of his staff. 3, requests made on Schein's behalf ranged from several for a direct commission before he was inducted to many for special assignments, relief from routine duties such as KP, extra time off, and special visitor privileges. I may say that during my tenure as Secretary of the Army, there is no record that matches this persistent, tireless effort to obtain special consideration and privileges for this man. The Schein case is only an example of the wrongful seeking of privilege, of the perversion of power. It has been a distraction that has kept many men from the performance of tasks far more important to the welfare of this country than the convenience of a single Army private.
I said, let's talk about Schein. And that started a chain of events, an experience similar to none which I have had in my life. Mr. Cohn became extremely agitated and he became extremely abusive. The thing that he was so violent was the fact that the Army was not agreeing to an assignment for Schein. I said to Cohn that I'd like to give him some advice. I pointed out to him that the national interest required that Schein be treated just like every other soldier.
Morgenthau.
Well, what was his
These
reply?
people went on to form the United
He
Nations.
exploded at that and said that if the national interest was the thing we were interested in,
And
he'd
staff
pay us a
it.
little bit. I knew that
How about these guys?
90% of all inductees ultimately face overseas duty, and I knew that one day we were going to face that problem, Mr. Cohn, as to Schein. I asked him what would happen if Schein got overseas duty.
You mean you were breaking the news gently, Mr.
Yes, sir. That is right. I asked him what would happen if Schein got overseas duty. He responded with vigor and force. Stevens is through as Secretary of the Army. I said, oh, Roy, something to this effect. Oh, Roy, now don't say that. I said, come on. Really, what is going to happen if Schein gets overseas duty? And he responded with even more force, we'll wreck the Army. This was a subject. Schein.
Well, now, do we get it that you deny it, you affirm it, or you say you've got no recollection of it?
The pumpkin papers.
I'll tell you,
Okay,
sir,
I'm
that,
so sorry. I need to stop. It's
Number
time
one,
to
I have a
stop.
pretty good recollection. Number two, I remember that day. Number three, I do not remember saying any of those things the way Mr. Adams has them. And number four, I've checked with the only other person who was there on that occasion, and he says my recollection is correct, that I did not make those statements.
And as I get it now, you're saying that you have no recollection of it.
No, sir. I say I do not recall having said.
Who was stationed in Chongqing, China, and Robert Stripling, who was the staff director of that committee, Richard Nixon was on that committee in the House at that time, saved the day because they had these documents and they would not hand them over to the Justice Department to be impounded with the rest of the evidence that Chambers had given to them. And I believe, reading all the information I can look at, that if they had not had, if the House committee had not had that information, I think they would have indicted Whitaker Chambers.
Whitaker Chambers hid microfilms in a pumpkin.
Many other examples like this. I will cite one other in terms of the policy implications of this. And that was really more important than the espionage, although both things occurred. The number one case that Joe McCarthy had was a diplomat, State Department Foreign Service officer named John Stewart Service, who was stationed in Chongqing, China in the World War II period, right up to the end of the war. And he was sending back dispatches from China attacking the anti-communist government of China at that time.
Oh, up to 45 million people killed by Mao's Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962. So this did affect
and glorifying the Chinese communists.
That's
and
just
stuff he had to
one
say about the Chinese communists, I quote a lot of my book, is just unbelievable. They're Democrats. They're like American, you know, they're good people. They're the ones fighting the Japanese. Chiang Kai-shek is worthless. John Stewart Service, who was writing these memoranda back to Washington, was living at a house in Chongqing with not one, but two Soviet agents. One of these I've already mentioned was a man named Solomon Adler, who was a Treasury attaché, worked for yet another Soviet agent named Harry Dexter White. And he was living, roommate with Service, and they collaborated on writing these memoranda back to Washington, attacking Chiang Kai-shek and glorifying the communists, then rebels against Chiang Kai-shek in the northwest part of China. These dispatches were then funneled into Treasury Secretary Morgenthau, into the White House, into the State Department, and became the basis for policy which did, in fact, cut off aid to Chiang Kai-shek. They cut off first the financial aid, then they cut off the military aid. And later on, there was one plot to murder Chiang Kai-shek, which I wrote about in the book, and later a plot to have a coup d'etat to overthrow him.
I've got to stop.
With a dissident general on Formosa. So there's nonstop plotting against Chiang Kai-shek in our government up through the 40s into 1950. John Stewart Service, who was right in the middle of all this, came back to Washington in April of 1945. And as soon as he got back here, he started hanging out with a bunch of communists and pro-communists, the main one being a man named Philip Jaffe, who was a communist, self-admitted communist, even though he was not a member of the party, but he called himself a communist, who edited a magazine called Amorasia. And Service started giving documents to this editor, Jaffe, and it turned out that a lot of other people were giving Jaffe documents too from the government. And in June of 1945, the FBI swooped down and arrested these people. They arrested Service, they arrested Jaffe, and they arrested 4 other people who were implicated in the passing around of these documents.
Okay, I gotta stop. I'm sorry. You get the idea.
Well, that's what I get your answer to be. Now, you don't recall having said it.
No, sir.
But you don't deny it.
Sir, I'm saying I did not say that. I am sure
All right, now you're saying you did not say it, Mr. Combs.
Yes, sir. I say I am sure that I did not make that statement, and I am sure that Mr. Adams and
at one point he called Donald Trump his best friend.
Could not ever believe that I was threatening to wreck the Army or that I could wreck the Army. I say, sir, the statement is ridiculous.
I'm talking about Stevens being through as Secretary of the Army.
That's equally ridiculous, sir.
And untrue.
Yes, sir. Equally ridiculous and untrue.
Oh, I just saw RFK.
That one of the few things that he had trouble with Mr. Cohen about was David Schauner. He said that...
I gotta stop. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I'm stopping. Just stop, Heidi. Stop. Just stop. I did not even get into half the stuff that I wanted to because I'm trying to do like a friggin' way too much. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Nobody's even here anymore. Thank you. Goodbye. Merry Christmas. I don't know. McCarthy vindicated. Okay, bye.